Okay, so final speaker, but our first speaker, also our first speaker for the session. We're going to invite Prof. Kushner back to discuss what can I learn from the patient by taking a weight history. Please welcome again Prof. Kushner.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much. I'm going to change gears quite a bit for this second talk from that lofty 40,000 feet, here's the future of medicine, and go into lifestyle medicine, obesity medicine. Instead, I'm going to actually get into the trenches. So for those of you who are practicing clinicians, I'm going to hopefully give you something to think and to do when you go back to your patient care, whenever that is. I wanted to focus on weight history, and the reason that I drilled down and developed the whole talk on this and the work I'm doing, as you're going to see, is because when I have residents rotate with me, both internal medicine, family medicine residents, they don't know how to take a weight history. They just said, what was your highest weight? What was your lowest weight? What do you want to weigh? And that turns into the weight history. And what I hope to convince you is that that's the richness. That's the chief complaint. And I want to know more about the obesity history. And I'm going to tell you why we need to do it and how to do it a little bit better. So the outline is to first go over the importance of a weight history. The second is the value of using a life event graph. Is something I've been using for a decade, and I'll show you the richness of using that technique. And then lastly, something that I'm now just developing, and that is using mnemonics to help a learner to remember how to take a good weight history. So first of all, just from the literature, why is weight history important? Multiple population studies have shown that the timing, pattern, and trajectory of body weight gain is predictive of future occurrence of obesity, development of comorbidities, physical impairment, and mortality. And here's some data from the literature. This came out several years ago, but what it shows, at least in the US, and I think it's similar in other areas of the world, this data comes from the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth, in which individuals who were born in, the data began in 1979, in which this cohort was 14 to 22 years old. And it's a rich cohort of which they've done multiple studies on as these young adults aged, adolescents and young adults aged, so that over an 18-year period of time, they really learned about the incidence of medical problems. And what you see is the increase in weight for males and females over this period of time. The average weight was 9.5 kilograms. This is probably no surprise to you. People gain weight as they age. Here's just some of the data that looks at it. The importance of it, though, has recently become apparent as we look at the importance of weight gain. This study was just published in JAMA. It's a wonderful article. I encourage you all to read it. It's the association of weight gain from early adulthood to middle adulthood and the risk of developing major chronic diseases. They define major chronic diseases as type 2 diabetes, hypertension, CVD, obesity-related cancer, cholelithiasis, osteoarthritis, cataract, and death. It's data from the Nurses' Health Study and Health Professional Follow-Up Study, which has been an incredible rich resource of so much data that's come out of Harvard. And what you see here is the hazards ratio for both women in the left, men on the right, of developing these major cardiovascular diseases. So you're not looking at obesity, you're just looking at weight gain. That's the parameter they're looking at. And what you see is individuals who gained more weight, which is on the x-axis for both men and women, they developed higher rates or incidence of major chronic disease. The next slide comes from the same study, but it's presented a little bit differently. I like presenting data this way, where the line, everything to the left of the line is an increased occurrence, everything to the left of the line is a reduced occurrence for both men and women. And what you see is the greatest impact of weight gain is on type 2 diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, called them cardiometabolic illnesses, particularly for women when it comes to diabetes, but men in this study is very similar. And also, if you then look at the composite of healthy aging, which is a really cool additional parameter they looked in this cohort. So it's not just, we talked about definition of health earlier from the WHO. So we're not only looking at what is the downside of gaining weight as you age, but also, you know, what are you missing out on? And that's where they looked at the composite healthy aging, which is no self-reported history of chronic disease, no cognitive decline, and no physical limitations. And you see that's on the left side of the line. So as people age, they have less health as well as developing more illnesses. So it shows very nicely looking and tracking of weight gain has a significant impact. There's another new methodology that I'm not a mathematician and epidemiologist, but latent class trajectories is something that I'm now being introduced to, where you take a cohort and through computer analysis, you could develop trajectories, right, modeling different weight gains. And this data comes from the NIH ARP diet study and the PLO cancer screening trial. So it's a large database, and through computer modeling, they can develop trajectories of weight gain. And the value of this, they particularly wanted to look at esophageal cancer. That was the purpose of this study. And what they found is that last trajectory, those that were overweight at age 20 and crossed over to obesity had a much higher risk of developing esophageal cancer than those who were overweight and didn't cross over that threshold. And indeed, what you see is a 60 to 70% increase in risk of esophageal and gastricardiac cancer. And these types of things have been done with diabetes, insulin resistance, cardiovascular disease. I just happen to pick out one comorbidity. So this latent class trajectory analysis has been used for a whole host of illnesses now, which is very convincing that the pattern of weight gain, the trajectory of weight gain, when it starts to occur, and what lines you cross over, class 1, 2, 3, have an increased predictability of not so happy outcomes. This last study I'm going to show you before I talk about how do you interpret this in the patient came also this year from the Annals of Internal Medicine. And I said earlier, a lot of time we learn what's your maximum weight, what's your lowest weight, what's your goal weight. That seems to be what's taught in medical education. And this study actually shows asking someone your maximum body weight appears to be important. So what this is a BMI ranges on the X curve. Y curve is hazard ratio of death. And most of the cohort studies start at time zero, that is, what did you weigh at time zero, and then you follow them out for 10 to 15 years and you see what death rate is. That's why you get this J-shaped curve. In this study, they went further and said, what was your maximum lifetime weight? And when you do that, what you see is sharper limits or sharper increases in the risk of death. So even though when you see the patient, they may weigh 200 pounds, if their lifetime higher was 250, they actually have a higher risk. So this maximum weight appears to have a legacy effect or a memory effect somehow in causing increase, at least death in this case. So that's a good question to actually ask. So how do we translate this as clinicians? Well, the electronic health record really makes this really a lot easier. For the very first time, we can look at weight trajectories in our patients if you use a medical health record. I happen to take just examples, patient A, patient B from my own practice. This is where you want to identify the patient. A 10% weight gain, that's when you want to intervene because you see what that trajectory is looking at. If this patient, if you had a health system that, or electronics that identify with the best practice alert, your patient has gained 10% weight, you would have been notified there. Unfortunately, I saw the patients at the end of these graphs when no one was paying attention, or if the doctor mentioned the patient just kept gaining weight. I don't know which one occurred. But using a health record can be very, very valuable. The other benefit of taking a robust weight record is that you start to understand the etiology of weight gain. If someone presents at 250 pounds, you kind of want to know, well, how did you get there? Because that informed you about how you want to treat your patient. So there are biological reasons why people gain weight. I won't read them. You can look at them yourself. There are social habitual reasons why people gain weight, and there are psychological reasons why people gain weight. The more you understand why people gain weight, the more you can connect with them and actually intervene and provide care. So the value of a life events graph. This is something I've been doing for quite some time. It's basically asking someone to chart their weight and record in their own handwriting, or they could do it at home if they want, the life events as they see it that may have led to the weight gain. It uses elements of that we know in medicine as narrative medicine. Narrative medicine is storytelling, right? It's that richness of hearing from their perspective, their perception of illness or death or loneliness or what it's like to be a patient with diabetes. An autobiographical approach is the whole idea of, this is how I see the events as they occur. It's like a memoir. It's like, I'm not sure it's true, but this is what I'm feeling. Heuristics is pattern recognition, and then patient-centered care. The more you know about the patient, the more you could center your care with them. So all the graphs I'm going to show you use these principles from medicine. So what I have patients do when they see me is I just give them a weight time graph, and they fill it in themselves. So I'm going to show you just examples of how varied people are when they come to see you. So this is a woman who gained weight in college, marriage, pregnancy. You could read yourself menopause, personal illness, family illness, ends up with personal illness, family deaths, and so on. So what am I thinking as the clinician? I'm thinking that there are social causes to the weight gain. I'm thinking there's 2 biological causes of the weight gain, which is pregnancy and menopause. And I'm also thinking of psychological causes to the weight gain. So people don't differentiate from one to the other. It's basically all in there. Here's another one: death in the family, more sedentary job, full-time job, school, death in family, Weight Watchers started to gain weight. I'm actually seeing someone where I'm going to explore coping, stress, and resiliency. This is a lot of stuff coming at this person, and I'm going to assess what is their ability to cope, locus of control, resiliency, and so on. Here's a real interesting one. Relatives commented just a bit about my weight. And you can see, and then you see that fleeting moment where she got into her dress at the wedding, right? And then started flipping back and forth again. And then someone said, you know what, use intuitive eating. Just eat if you feel like eating. And you could see what happened there. So what I'm thinking as a clinician, without even talking to her, I'm thinking, does she have a binge eating disorder? Does she have bipolar disorder? Does she have body image disturbance? Does someone have low frustration? I don't know if she has that, but it's telling me I need to explore that further. Here's someone who gained weight from using medication, antipsychotics. It's just a reminder to you to take a good medication history, anti-diabetic medication, psychotropics, steroids, non-specific beta blockers. All these drugs cause weight gain, so you're going to want to take a weight history. And the last one is someone who had a case of hypothalamic obesity. This is what it looks like, a craniopharyngioma. All of a sudden, this woman started gaining weight, getting blurred vision. This is what happened to her weight, had a craniotomy, went on steroids, and I could tell you this person needs a biological treatment. Talking to her about, slowing down her eating and so on is not going to be as effective. She has a biological cause to weight gain. So this is what this approach is all about. I'd encourage you to potentially use it. If you use this, here's the last one, summarizes it so well: life. Just life got in the way. And that's what happens. I'm going to end by, I started off by telling you that it's hard to teach people. I watch, I observe all my residents when they do a full obesity history and physical, because it's like an OSCE. No one's observed them, and it's very valuable to be observed when you're a third-year resident and so on, because they haven't done it since medical school, and they're floundering. They have no idea how to take a weight history. So I started thinking that the skill and parameters of taking a weight history have not been traditionally taught. I just said that. However, the mnemonic OPQRST is commonly used for learning in a patient chief complaint, and the same mnemonic, I think, could be applied to taking weight history. I don't know if you guys use it, but if you look up a standard physical exam textbook, they talk about OPQRST. It's how to learn about a chief complaint. So this is what I'm recommending. It's submitted for publication. I'm waiting for the rejection. We talked about rejections earlier today. I'll see how resilient I am in reformatting a paper when it may not be accepted. But one way to think about doing a weight history is OPQRST, always onset. When did you first gain weight? Was it in high school, college, early 20s, and so on? What's your heaviest weight? P for precipitating. What life events led to your weight gain? How much weight did you gain with pregnancy? How much weight did you gain when you stopped smoking? How much weight did you gain when you started insulin? Quality of life. At what weight did you feel your best? What's hard to do at your current weight? Remedy, what have you done and tried to control your weight? What's the most successful approach you've had? What do you attribute the weight loss to, and what caused you to gain the weight back? Setting, what was going on in your life at that time, what was going on when you gained weight, how important is social support or having a buddy up, and lastly, temporal pattern. What's the pattern of your weight gain? Did you gradually gain it, or is it cyclic, or are there large swings in your weight? So I don't know whether this will fly after this meeting and maybe put to rest after this meeting. I don't know. We'll see if it ever gets published. But it's a way, and this is called educational research, if you will, and then testing it. Does this really change education about how to take a weight history, which I think is something missing. So if a weight history is conducted properly, I think patients feel validated and acknowledged regarding their weight journey. And if you haven't done it, trust me, if you want to sit down for just 2 minutes and take a weight history, patients really feel like you're listening. Someone's listening to them for the first time. You will feel more empathetic and informed to provide meaningful and practical patient-centered treatment. At least that's my hypothesis, if you will. And this is what I've been doing for quite some time. So what's the takeaway themes? Weight gain that occurs during young adulthood with a steep trajectory has an increased risk for obesity-related comorbidities. Taking a body weight history is an essential feature of the obesity assessment and should be included in training for all health professionals. Applying mnemonics that are commonly used in history taking can potentially facilitate learning this important new skill. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Kushner. Are there any questions?
How do you approach, or what do you say to them?
Yeah, so if you didn't hear it, I'm not sure my phone's on. How do you advise healthcare providers who have overweight or are obese by themselves? You can do it 2 ways. The best way, I think, is to relate to the patient really, and if you feel comfortable, and say, I myself am struggling with my weight. I get it. It's multifactorial. There's multiple things going on here, and I try to live a healthy life too, and I still have difficulty managing my weight. I think that really levels the playing field. And it may be worth saying it, because if you don't verbalize it, the patient may very well be thinking, how the heck are you going to help me? You can't even lose, look what you look like, you know? So I think it's actually therapeutic and helpful to verbalize, I get it, I'm working on my weight too. Now let's see if I can help you.
Dr. Bloomfield?
Thank you. Again, another excellent presentation.
Thank you.
What do you think is the best way to get patients to respond to you who are having problems coping with weight? And I mean, it usually is getting heavier. Because I'm one person, I literally beat up all my patients about, and they know, but I don't think that works.
Are we talking? You talking about adherence? Is that what you're asking me about? How do you help patients be more adherent?
Say that again?
Are you talking about adherence?
Adherence, yeah.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
So we teach motivational interviewing in our medical school. I don't know if you're familiar with MI or motivational interviewing. It's really all about understanding what is the ambivalence, what are the barriers that get in the way for you to change your behavior or do the things that we have already agreed are healthy for you to do. And really just add, and the other way that we use all the time is asking a patient, how important is it for you to eat healthier on a scale of 0 to 10? How confident are you to do it on a scale of 0 to 10? So you numerically nail down where's their head at. And then you explore that further. So it may go like this. You just told me it's an 8 out of 10 to eat healthier, but it's only a 5 out of 10 that you're confident that you can do it. What can I do, or what needs to happen to get that confidence score up to an 8 to match the importance score? Most patients will tell you, either tell my significant other stop bringing home donuts every day, or my boss has me at my desk every day. I have to run out for 30 minutes to eat fast food, and you may or may not be able to help them with it, but at least you understand what the issue is, and they don't want to be bad patients. They just find it hard to implement the changes you're recommending because of a myriad of problems. You need to inquire what that is. So that's what I do every day.
My question is more of an extension to Dr. Chin's question. I don't know whether I understood. Is how do you advise healthcare workers, including physicians, who themselves are obese, but who are your patients? How do you approach them about managing them? How
Yeah,
different-
so I actually see a lot of healthcare workers where I'm at. I'm in an academic institution, so I'll see nurses, I'll see physicians, I'll see, you know, a variety of techs, echo techs, and so on. First of all, I treat them as a patient. You know, if I see another doctor, I go, you know what to do. I treat them as a patient. And it doesn't even matter if they're a doctor. I talk to them exactly like I talk to any other patient because they're as my patient. But I had the added value of knowing what their life is like, you know, because of their profession. So my recommendations will try to be practical, realistic. We call them SMART goals, specific, measurable, you know, that type of stuff. And I basically work with them. One other thing is that success, and Larry Chess can talk about this tomorrow, hopefully he'll bring this up, is the most successful predictor of weight management is frequency of visits, accountability, you know, keeping in touch with your healthcare provider. So if you're seeing a patient for weight management and expect, you know, see you back in 3 months, carry out my orders, that ain't going to happen. You know, you have to have the person coming back for accountability.
Thank you, Prof.
Because I do see his patients, and you can't read up on them because they say they can't go back to see Dr. Ruby again. Because they haven't lost any weight, you can't read up on them.
Well, I tried other strategies. That's why I'm pleading. Again, like I said earlier.
We'd like to thank all of our speakers and you, the audience. Please, Dr. Roberts.
I'm going to indulge you to please remain seated. We have our final 2 speakers for this afternoon. I'll take this minute. I really want to thank our international guests who have come to be with us so far. The information that they have imparted is exceptional. I think it's really important. They've brought great highlights to our meeting. I also... Oh, you can't hear me? No, I said I want to thank our international speakers who have come, and so far they've brought a lot of knowledge to the meeting, interesting talk. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome our Madam Vice President of the Senate, who is an integral part of our faculty, Associate Lecturer, Dr. Mildred Hall, who will chair the session. Dr. Hall is a graduate of Harvard University. She's done obstetrics and gynecology there. She has returned home many years ago. I wouldn't say how long ago, but she has been the head of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology. And so we're very pleased that she's here to chair the session today. Dr. Hall, Watson.
Good evening, everyone. Dr. Roberts very kindly introduced me and said he would not say how long since I've been home. Well, I'd like just to share with you that when I did come home, I met Dr. Roberts here. So, it's not as it may seem. First of all, I'm very pleased that I've been asked to participate in the research day that is annually held. It's important, I think, as everything that we do, that a lot of it is inclusive of research, because it is the results of our research that allows us, in large part, to make policies which are going to be effective and responsive to the issues that we have in health. As a country, I personally feel we probably need to do a whole lot more and actually use the results that come up as a result of the research to establish policies, implement them, and enforce them. And I think that is something that all of us, but particularly individuals who are involved in policies for the country, pay attention to, so that long-term we can benefit from the research that we do. As your moderator, I will be essentially, I think everybody should have a program, introducing our first speaker who will give us greetings and some remarks. And if you will excuse me 1 minute. Now, having just spoken, all of you know who Dr. Roberts is. But protocol, of course, demands that I reintroduce him to you all. Dr. Roberts, generally, but especially personally to me, is an exceptional and innovative physician who, after primary school, began his formal education wearing short pants at the government high school. Because in those days, everybody from what we call forms, from first form to, I think it was his third form, was required to wear short pants. You could not wear long pants until you got into fourth form, okay? So I didn't know him very well in high school. He claims he knew me, but I guess there are reasons why he would look at me and I wouldn't look at him. But successfully completing high school and then going on to university and medical school, graduating with honors at all levels, he subsequently returned home from his postgraduate training, and he has truly been an innovator in his specialty of urology and in the field of medicine, not only clinically, but also academically. He has multiple papers that have been presented nationally and internationally, president of a successful medical organization, director of the Bahamas campus of the University of the West Indies, which under his tutelage has grown by leaps and bounds. And now he has stepped up to another level. He's now a policymaker in public administration of our health sector. If he does anywhere as well in the establishment and administration of policies in our health sector as he has done at the Bahamas campus, then I think we have a lot of good things to look forward to. And so, let me reintroduce to you my colleague and friend, the inimitable Dr. Robin Roberts.
I've been talking to you all day. I want to welcome you here. The meeting so far has been tremendous. For those who missed the publication session this morning, I think you missed a great time and a great opportunity to learn in terms of publishing. This afternoon, the speakers have been great. This is a moment for us to thank particularly our sponsors and to recognize our ministry, which both of whom have been very important and instrumental in us reaching where we are today. So, without any further ado, thank you, Madam Chair. It's great to have you here and looking forward to seeing you tomorrow as well. Thank you. Welcome our international speakers.
Now, Dr. Roberts has been my friend for a long time. I've never, ever heard him speak that briefly. Of course, our next speaker who's going to bring us some remarks is the representative from our primary sponsor for this activity, the Royal Bank of Canada. And so I introduce to you Mrs. LaSonia Mizik.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the leaders and employees at RBC Royal Bank, I'll put this down. Sorry. It is with great pleasure that we congratulate your team for hosting the 11th Annual Research Day of the University of the West Indies, Bahamas. Your theme, Weight Challenges in the Bahamas, Are We the Biggest Losers?, is an important and relevant one. We commend you for this focus, as a nation can only be as healthy as its citizens. I hope that we can begin to see a decline in obesity and non-communicable diseases through your research and also through healthier eating and lifestyles. This is a powerful theme that resonates with households and businesses alike. This is a timely and wonderful event for both the Bahamas and the university because it demonstrates a commitment to invest in a medical research program that benefits healthcare development and delivery throughout the region. RBC is honored to have provided UWI with banking services since the inception of the Bahamas' program in 1997. And we were the inaugural sponsors of the very first research day, and we think that deserves a round of applause. We certainly see this continued partnership as another opportunity to invest in our country, helping our clients thrive and communities prosper in a tangible way. By supporting important initiatives such as this, it will contribute to the well-being of our Bahamian people. Change is occurring in every industry in our world, and RBC is evolving with this change. We are on a journey of digital transformation, and we have many new products and services that will help professionals like yourselves save time by doing your banking on your terms, anywhere, anytime. Our mobile banking app, recently launched, allows clients to conduct transactions without joining a single line. I will repeat that. Our mobile banking app allows clients to conduct transactions without joining a single line at any of our RBC branches. We are forward-thinking, and we would like to work with you as we are moving towards our transformation phase. RBC has always been strongly supportive of educational and healthcare initiatives, and we are intentional regarding investing strategically in sponsorships that will produce a lasting social impact. The University of the West Indies continues to provide top quality education services in the Bahamas for undergraduate and postgraduate medical students. The university has had a strong medical faculty for over half a century and now has thousands of alumni around the world in key positions in the medical field, including many in the Bahamas. We are confident that this partnership between RBC and UWI will continue to make significant contributions to this country and the medical industry as a whole. UWI has a philosophy of engaging with the communities and regions in which it operates to ensure that its research, teaching, and consulting activities are relevant to the development objectives of the host country. RBC is fully in sync with the same philosophy. Thank you for extending this opportunity to once again partner with the University of the West Indies in your 11th year of the Research Day. We wish you good success as you continue to excel and find solutions for the betterment of our nation and our world. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Missick. No matter what it is that we want to do in life, we find that goodwill, good deeds are all good things. But until we have financing, very little happens anywhere. So we appreciate the support that the Royal Bank has always given the community, but in particular, this organization of University of West Indies and this particular project. We were supposed to have the Honorable Dr. Dwayne Sands, our current Minister of Health, to speak with us. Obviously, there were reasons in which he could not, and so he has sent a very able representative. I met this physician many years ago, coming home after Dr. Roberts, and as an anesthesiologist, he performed par excellence. He is always helpful as an anesthesiologist. It's never a time when you're in surgery and you need, just that little bit more push. And this particular physician was always there, ready, able, and willing. As a matter of fact, whenever you said to him, meeting him in the corridor or the operating room, "How are you doing?" And Dr. Benaby's response would always be, "Honored to serve." And so I introduce to you this evening a physician who is representing our Minister of Health, Dr. Glenn Benaby.
Good evening to you all. And I was sitting there and wondering whether I should say senior colleague, which will not be appropriate, Senator. So I would address you the way I ought to. Senator Hall Watson, thank you very much for your introduction. The University of the West Indies School of Clinical Medicine and Research, the emphasis on this occasion being on research, has done it once again in putting on its annual 11th Research Day. The introduction theme, obesity in the Bahamas. Are we the biggest losers? I also take this opportunity to greet you on this occasion, having been out of official function for more than 9 months. And so, to the dean himself, I call him the dean, he's a director, but he functions like any dean I know in the university circuit. Dr. Robin Roberts, my good friend. And I see the PAHO representative here, Dr. DeVille, and Mr. Brown, and Ms. Walker, and my good friend and consultant colleague who gave us the benefit of his knowledge 7 months ago, Donald Simeon. Nice to see you, it's a pleasure. And a number of other new faces who are new to me, and I assume many of them are lecturers, a cadre of whom are outstanding as I review their CVs in preparation for this meeting. I take this opportunity in the midst of you, my colleagues, to mention that research extends far beyond the principal researcher or co-researcher or the sponsor. Of course, the importance of the sponsor is significant in many times in the funding. But what the Bahamas and the Caribbean region lacks is a dearth of persons who understand what research is really about and the real intent of research, which Senator Watson mentioned a moment ago, and that is to provide knowledge that will be transformed into meaningful work and actual changing the culture in our society in the areas in which research is being done. It is with this that I was very pleased to note the initiative of the university to include first writer workshop for writers and publishers, because doing research does not have much value if the work that you've done lie on shelves and gather dust. It's important for the things that you do to be transformed into policies, become information, and be disseminated throughout the public and the public at large to have the best effect of improving the healthcare in our society. And so today, as the Dean has, in his classical manner, invited a cadre of speakers and researchers from across the continent, we are very pleased to have the privilege to hear from you, all of you, which will spark our interest and meaningful discourse in this environment of science. A topic like obesity is very common, and it gives one the feel that he or she is an expert. But what we really need to do is to listen to those around us. Realizing it or not, some years ago, maybe about a decade ago, I was trying to recall the exact time, Ivy Duman, the governor of the Bahamas, said to me once at an official opening, our healthcare workers are so obese. And I went about, along with Rhoda Bullitt, of doing a research on healthcare workers, only to find that the vast majority of healthcare workers, nurses in particular, I hope they will allow me to say that, were overweight, far beyond the figures that we have as classical, meaning more than 65% overweight and more than 40% obese. But not only that, we had healthcare workers at the time whose blood sugar was more than 500. Shocking news to us. So it goes to show how important it is for us to be conscious, and I heard Dr. Bloomfield and Dr. Chen's input earlier, but I think all of us ought to be more aware and more conscious of the weight of the healthcare worker in our environment. It is something we need to pay attention to because it is significant to the care of our patients. And it's terribly important for us to do well. They say, set the example. And although it may not be easy to do, it is something that requires an effort to do it. Our keynote speaker, Professor Fitzroy Henry, is a professor from Public Health Nutrition in the College of Health Science and the School of Public Health, and former director of the Caribbean Specialized Center for PAHO and World Health Organization, which is more than 17 countries. I mention these things because we look forward to hearing from people who have that kind of experience and that kind of exposure across the Caribbean. One simple matter that we often don't take account of, but it's very real. Every function that we have, it is socially and culturally expected that we will have food. And the food is not necessarily healthy. And I don't know whether you have anything to eat this afternoon. I wouldn't be surprised. Other areas of interest is the speaker who will be speaking to us on optimal vegetarian diet for cancer, Dr. Joanne Servate. These areas are areas of real interest. People really want to know what is producing this high level of cancer in a society, such as even the Bahamas, where we have the highest rate of cancer in young women in this part of the world. And how great it will be if we can know with some level of confidence that by eating one diet or another, we will improve the outcome from this disease in our communities. And as we look forward, we are constantly bombarded by various opportunities to change, adjust the way we lose weight in many different aspects. Bariatric surgery is one, and we look forward to hearing on the interesting things that will happen. Our home developed experts, the work done by Donald Simeon and others, is something that we really are proud of and love to hear shared in this kind of international environment where we can get a better grasp of others in terms of their review of the work that we have done in this environment. I look at Dr. Frankson, and Frankson, it comes to mind that you ought to encourage Dr. Roberts to do more courses that involve autonomy, benevolence, malfeasance, and justice, because many of us who come to these research meetings can gain much more from the research meeting itself if we have a better handle on statistics and those 4 pillars of ethics in the scientific sense. But as we look to the future with hope, and we look to the future with encouragement, while we as stakeholders, all of us, at all levels, collaborate and be appreciative of each other, as we look to strengthen research in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And I bring you words on behalf of the Minister, who is particularly interested in standards, which is a hallmark of research. Standards, setting of standards and maintaining standards. And that is something that we ought to do, because no matter how good the research is only going to hold water or to be firm and strong according to the weakest link. So it behooves us to be certain that we get as many of the persons, our stakeholders, having a better understanding and appreciation of research itself and a familiarity with the terms and that statistics, Dr. Franson, that tend to give us all some challenge. As I leave you as one of you, just to leave this place to further display, to reinforce those things which I will hear while I'm here, and to enforce as best as I can the things that will make our research in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas better. So on behalf of the Minister of Health and the leadership team of the ministry, it gives me great pleasure, honestly, to declare the 11th Annual Research Day officially open. Enjoy the meeting. If you enjoy the meeting, it will tell me that you have learned something, you have understood something. Be open. Do enjoy the proceedings and find new friends and new partners to cooperate and to collaborate to make the research in this environment the best it can be. I look forward, as Chief Medical Officer, to the excellence that I expect to come from you. May God bless you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Benavi. I think hopefully your words will be paid attention to, and we will continue to make every effort to improve our research methodology and utilization and enforcement of our results from the policies that come forth. As we continue our program this evening, our next speaker will be Dr. Morton Frankson. His lecture will be university-based health research, a decade plus, nourishing Bahamian medicine. Dr. Frankson is a lecturer in epidemiology, biostatistics, and bioethics. He is ethical stakeholder involvement in a personalized manner, in that he becomes involved with the researcher and what it is they're doing. I have seen Dr. Frankson work over the years that I've known him here at our Bahamas campus, and he is a hand-on type of person, particularly when working with our undergraduate students in their beginnings of research. He is, whether he's promoting wellness or in actualizing community-oriented medical education and research, he is persistent, he has passion, and follow through. He doesn't leave a student hanging, so to speak. His career commenced in the year 1977. You're looking very well, Dr. Frankson. As he practiced as a physician, public health professional, and more recently, academician. A graduate of both the University of the West Indies and Loma Linda University, he has served as a hospital-based medical officer with Jamaica's Ministry of Health and Environment, medical officer of health with a USAID-funded community-oriented primary healthcare project in Trenchtown, Jamaica, by the Adventist Development and Relief Agency. As the coordinator of the Youth Development and Teen Pregnancy Reduction Project of the Riverside, San Bernardino counties in the Indian Health Service in California. He was granted several federal several grant-funded projects relating to these particular things that he was involved with. As a chief medical officer within the Ministry of Health of the government of Turks and Caicos Islands, he was also involved in being able to obtain fundings from from the United States funding agencies. He presently enjoys research and teaching in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Now, Dr. Frankson, as someone who was intimately involved in family planning in the Bahamas, and someone who continues to be intimately involved as a founding member of PACE Foundation, where we work with teen pregnant women, it is unfortunate that I'm just now finding out about you and this kind of involvement, because we definitely can use your expertise in helping us to continue with those projects. So I will be knocking on your door from this point on in order for you to assist us. For the past 13 years, his salutary contribution has been as an academician bolstering clinical research, employing participatory, empowering approaches with medical professionals and related graduate and undergraduate students, both in Jamaica and the Bahamas campus. Over that period, he has supervised the research of over 100 research projects executed with These projects were executed with collaborating academic stakeholders and has relentlessly tackled related challenges, including and improving peer review, dissemination of findings, and hopefully soon implementation. I introduce to you Dr. Frankson.
Okay. I'm just looking in here to see if there's anybody. I'm looking here to see if there is anybody in medical school before me in here. Dr. Roberts, no. He would have been, but he went to Canada and did his bachelor's because he's just 2 months older than me. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been a pleasure working since I arrived here on the 1st of April, 2009, to present in the Bahamas. It has not been easy. In fact, it has been downright rough. I came here very slim, and now I'm muscular. And I understand all kinds of other BMI classifications now, like fluffy and solid, and so on and so forth. I'm one of those. I think it's solid, but muscular. I'd like to talk with you today in a very informal way because I don't want to spoil the mood and give you too many things in regards to the areas that I'm really proficient in, which is statistics and epidemiology and all of that. You get enough of that from me. I'd like to try my hand at a new thing this evening, and that is to just reach you from a more relaxed position. When I came
when I saw the job here, I had actually, a year before, sought a job with Fitz Henry. And I was at the time working as a health research scientist with the dean's office. And boy, that was one interview that I blew. But he was kind to me. He called me. And he wanted me to help him in another area. But I was praying about the matter. And I said, well, let me ask God to really deliver me from the salaries of Jamaica. And he did. I looked in the newspaper and there was an ad to come to the Bahamas. I applied. I later found out I was the only applicant. God is mighty. He blocked all those other needy people just for me. I did something here in the last 8 years that I did also in 3 years in the Bahamas. And the person I have to thank for that is Donald Simeon. When he was director of the Caribbean Health Research Council, as chief medical officer of one of the countries in the region, I was a board member. And I picked up very quickly that I needed to find ways to work very closely with the Caribbean Health Research Council. He sensed it too, maybe not with the same missions and goals that I had, but we had some common grounds. And he encouraged that upon moving from being chief medical officer in the Turks and Caicos Island, come and join the Caribbean Health Research Council, but not in its office, in the field, at the university, in the dean's office, because the residents, and to some extent the medical student, but the residents were having the toughest time doing the extra component that very few other postgrad places do in your training as a specialist. In our training, you have to do a very serious piece of research as part of not just being board certified or a member of some Royal College, etc., but getting an academic degree, the Doctor of Medicine, in whatever specialty it is. I was able to persuade the dean then, who is now the principal for the university, that what is needed is for these people to have a hands-on, very supportive input with research, because they don't do research every day. They're good at numbers, but the numbers that they're good at is the lab results, because they have to get them every day. But the research that they do finally calls upon them to use the methodology and the statistics in their last 15 months of 4 or 5 years of training, by which time the A that they got when they were doing their bachelor's in statistics, the A that they got in statistics, that also helped them to get into medical school, had vaporized mysteriously. And they were at a loss because medicine had stolen that quantitative aspect from them. I understood it because I'm a physician. I understood it because it was one of the reasons why I determined that I would go and get advanced training in biostatistics and epidemiology, because I know that sense of lostness when you ask a doctor who is already having a full day's service. In fact, with sometimes on-call. Well, when I was a resident, it was on-call every other day at the Kingston Public Hospital. And it was rough. And I knew that the only thing that people like that need is somebody to remind them that they have the capacity to do it, and to show them that you will not take their work from them, but rather you will work along with them as a colleague, as a friend, who did the crazy thing of going to learn biostatistics as a physician. Glenn Jones did the same thing, but he reverted to his radiology, radiation oncology, and he still is sharp in both areas. This morning we gave a definition of research that I'll just leave it there for you to pick a few things out of. It comes from the Council of International Organizations of Medical Sciences. And we ended with this beautiful slide of the fact that when you provide things that are a salve to people, salvific things, like excellent information, evidence to make decisions on, so that you can make your choices be lasting choices that are effective, it's a beautiful thing. This little boy depicts the coverage that comes from actually the best-selling book in the world. But what is true is that medicine provides that its knowledge and has that same kind of effect in that kind of situation as well. In our situation where we're dealing with people who are ill or who are on their way to becoming ill. It's wonderful to know that we work along with a most powerful being who loves and cares for us, who is way beyond us, but doesn't see any hardships in being right beside us. And that has been my model. I have taught the history of medicine year to year, and Hippocrates is inescapable. His observational techniques have enlightened the research, and he is a philosopher and a physician. We don't use his oath anymore. We use some quite significant adaptations from it. Sometimes we even strip it of any spiritual component. But we still can't get away from his wonderful principles. His principles of his respect for people, the dedication with which he takes it. And those are things that every medical school, some in the first year, some in later years, passes on. I mentioned one of his disciples, Galen, a Hippocratic physician, and the fact that he did tremendous work. But I also would mention people like Paul, who mentioned Dr. Luke in the Bible, the one who wrote both the book of Luke and Acts, as a physician who applies what he does with a full knowledge that our mission here is to love each other and to take care of them. Hippocrates left a body of work which is precious to us, but we're not sure whether it was even written by Hippocrates, but we're sure that what Galen wrote was definitely written by him. He had his own philosophy in life, that whatever was to happen to you was God's will, a concept called vitalism based upon a concept called demiurge. But despite that, he was arduous in the way that he would carry out work. His research involved a variety of major contributions. And the uso partium is, or on the use of the parts of the body, is one of his best known treatises that captures the work that he has done. It wasn't clear whether the pulse beat was related to the heart, yet still he established that. Arteries, he insisted, contain blood and not the mysterious pneuma. He worked on and established for us the common concepts that we have about the mechanisms of the bucket handle and so forth, mechanisms of breathing, etc., by observing, by doing research. And he showed that urine was made by the kidneys. It was thought that the bladder made urine. He cut the spinal cord in various manners and showed that if you went down, it didn't paralyze anything, but if you went across, it did. He changed a variety of things, and he was really impressive in the work that he did. After Rome fell, the Islamic influences helped to preserve the work that was done. And the Islamic influences include those three names that you see there: Razis, Avicenna and Ibn Sina, and Averroes or Ibn Rushdi. These all are fabulous people in doing research and in working on what Galen had written and in advancing the concept of a hospital, universities, etc. Many people will be left out as I jump from picture to picture now, but the principle is really what I have in mind. One of the persons that I've been fascinated with is William Harvey. Harvey, a very rich young man, very rich family, his brother, extremely prosperous merchant, simply telling him, you have all the money in the world to clear up any mysteries you want to have in medicine. William Harvey took on the concept of how blood flows through the body. Before that, it was thought that just like you go to the beach and you see the waves coming in and out, that's how blood went through your body, in waves. Harvey used research to show us that this is not possible. And he worked out for us the circulatory system as a more efficient way. He used it with reptiles, with snakes, etc. But Morgandi was another of the great ones. He, a staunch Catholic, all 7 of his daughters became nuns. All 5 of his sons became physicians. Found it in himself to organize in medicine a way that he could lead us to have the legacy of what we now know as the clinical pathological correlates because of the work he did observing, etc. Those are some of the giants on which medicine stands. Let me do some research, see if this works. Because the problem is really in my trachea. So for this to work, I have to go put it in my trachea. But life is complex, it works. John Hunter, famous. Every surgeon who really understands the legacy of surgery knows that he brought surgery into medicine through research. Behind him there you see the bone above his head, the bone of a giant who he stole the body from a grave, boiled down the body, and studied it. He did dissections from he was a lad. He established concepts related to how syphilis works in the body, giving himself syphilis, some say, some dispute it, and studying it and writing beautifully on it. And surgery became a part of medicine after that. His work was great. Let's jump and leave a lot of other important figures and become locally. David Picot, one of our professors, for those of us who have gone to the University of the West Indies, he started the Caribbean Health Research Council. It wasn't called that at the time, but his legacy in spirit continues. His work has been one where, among other things, he has laid the foundation for teaching medical students and PhD students in the health-related areas simple ways of understanding the basics of research. Sir George Allain, past director for PAHO, and then my classmate took over from him, Dr. Etienne. Again, a great teacher, a great researcher in nephrology, and several of us had the privilege of sitting at his feet and learning what medicine is. It is people like these that have helped me to say, is there more to medicine than patient care? Should patient care be just continued with traditional teachings, or should it go on evidence-based, growing from step to step? Well, what was happening to us in Jamaica was also happening to you folks in the Bahamas. And I picked on John Lund, who worked and has presented as one of the guest speakers, one of the keynote speakers here before, work that he has done. I have in the midst here, right here, not a day older, Professor Eldemire Shearer, renowned by the World Health Organization in geriatrics. And I think she was in the class below me. I'm just picking on people because of the saintliness in me. Robin Roberts and his work in a variety of areas with men's health, a variety of areas with promoting family planning, a variety of areas in urological related work, and even with the pioneering of work with the trauma registry in the Bahamas. Srikant Garipathy is really who I came. When I came, it's who I saw that was busy doing research. He had a grant, he was looking on keloids, and it was a reasonably well-funded grant. It's finished funding now. We now use a refrigerator to store our lunch. And his work has been fabulous. And it has been work along with a sponsoring agency. And one day he will tell us much of what came out of that bit of research. Vrunda Sakakar, I came and we found common ground, Dr. Hall Watson, in that she too was in love with adolescent health, with teen pregnancy. So we worked with the PACE program to see whether the PACE program was effective. Corinne Sinqui, when I got the job, I met her first at the Norman Manley International Airport, and while we were picking up our luggage, she came across to me and she said, just stay focused, do your work humbly, and prove yourself, and they will love and respect you. And Corinne, you were right. She has done important pieces of work on sickle cell disease, and in other areas. We spent one Christmas looking at the pediatric cancer profile of the Bahamas, and then writing it up and submitting it before the deadline 1 minute before New Year's Eve, leaving and going home to watch the fireworks as I was driving home with a wide stare of exhaustion in my eyes. Her work in mentoring students goes without saying. Dr. Christine Chin is the new kid on the block, and she has done work with body mass index comparisons between perceived versus ideal, and she is in the valley of decision, and my job, along with others I solicit, is to help her to move forward courageously, and I know today's presentations have done just that, because in her lies a great researcher. In fact, I'm just highlighting here the full-time faculty, but our associate lecturers have also been most indispensable to us as we have worked This is just some of them et al. And they have been not expected to actually find the time to push research because of their excessively busy schedule. But what they have done is they have lent themselves to the postgrad students and others to be supervisors, to be guides, and they have done so in a fabulous manner. The librarians have been tremendously helpful to us. Their names are there, and they have taught us the use of electronic assistance from EndNotes right through to world-class library searches, etc. Our postgraduates, like happened in Jamaica, what has happened here, our postgraduates, not one of them, since I have arrived, has failed the research component of their academic degree. And there's been a few of them. Undergraduates, here's Dr. Moxie. He and I, we have the charge, and now Dr. Conliffe, of moving forward with the undergraduates. And that's a neglected area because these undergraduates already, they're very peculiar in the UWI system. They're more like they would be fitting for an American medical school system. In our system, you come to, the typical West Indian comes to university, to medical school, after excellence in high school levels, to save cost, to save the college years, and so on. It's just a matter of economics, because getting that bachelor's is just not, nobody can debate. It's the extra education that gives an advantage in a very liberal arts, rounded kind of way. Not knocking in any way the system that admits people only when they have a bachelor's. But most of ours don't, except in the Bahamas. In the Bahamas, most of ours already have a bachelor's. And they have tasted a little bit of biochemistry research, etc. And Dr. Moxie, Dr. Conliffe, and myself, have had, and when they were in Trinidad and Barbados and so on in their formative years of medicine, they've learned a bit about epidemiology and biostatistics, etc., but and dabbling in human research. And they really, when they come, they nail down some very serious pieces of research that, unfortunately, we have to be discouraging them from really going out with the gusto that they really want to, because the pressures of completing their medical degree are just too overwhelming to ask them to do that. But despite that, they're disobedient. And they still push through, most of them, and really have done excellent work. It is not uncommon to see them at the Medical Association of the Bahamas annual conference winning third prize, second prize. I don't think any of them has won first prize yet. But that underscores what I'm talking about. And this is the only statistics slide I have to show you, and then we're over. I have actually had 244 research clients in the 8 years that I have been here, and it is significantly over 100 that we have taken through to the doctorate level. And you will see as you look through that the star of the day has been the family medicine program. It fits in with the agenda of the government to have primary care doctors prepared to the highest level. And our aspect of the clinically oriented primary care doctor, with a solid community base to it as well in the family medicine program, is this is a reflection that is being met. The other bar, under that bar is other. Under other are many sins. There are nurses who have nothing to do with the University of the West Indies. There are people from other universities in the Bahamas who have heard that there is research help here, and they have come. There are doctors, some smiling at me now, who have come. There are pharmacy students who I also co-teach on a program through the University of Technology. There is a variety of other people, physical therapy, etc., etc. And that category, really, we could claim, Dr. Roberts, as our community service as far as research is concerned, because we really didn't have to do it. We could have taken a hard line and said, we just don't have the staff, we don't have the faculty, go elsewhere. But it's an area of great need in the country to have that kind of research assistance with ambitious young people. The other areas, you see them. The other areas are internal medicine, 28 have been there, accident and emergency, 23, ONG 18, psychiatry 13, surgery 13, anesthesiology 2, dermatology 1, radiology 1. All of those have been areas where we have served. This is how we have nourished medicine to date. This University of the West Indies School of Clinical Medicine and Research, the research unit, thank you for being there for us. Thank you for the food that you have brought to the unit. Thank you for the fellowship. Thank you for the journal clubs. Thank you for the parties. Thank you for the commendation from the Medical Association of the Bahamas, as you have done, and God bless you.
Thank you, Dr. Frankson. Okay, we come to our Royal Bank of Canada lecture, which is going to be given to us by Professor Fitzroy Henry. Professor Henry joined the University of Technology, Jamaica in 2013 after serving for 18 years as the director of the Caribbean Food and Nutrition Institute, which is a specialized center of PAHO and WHO, serving 18 Caribbean countries. He obtained his doctorate from the University of London. His professional experience as associate professor scientist includes 5 years at Harvard University, 2 years in Nigeria, 7 years in Bangladesh, 2 years at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and 5 years in St. Lucia, West Indies. In a short conversation I had with Dr. Henry earlier, he tells me he hails from Guyana. By his travels, you'll never know that. He has published more than 120 scientific articles as first author on food and nutrition in illness, wellness and sports, food economics, chronic disease, obesity and public health. For 14 years, he was the editor-in-chief for CFNI's journal, CAJ Kejanas, and its newsletter, NIAM News. Professor Henry is UTEC's representative on Jamaica's Tertiary Education Commission. He's also the chairman of the cabinet-approved National Food Industry Task Force in Jamaica. In 2016, he won the President's Award at UTEC Jamaica for excellence in research. He was also celebrated in 2016 by the Caribbean Health Research Council for his outstanding and sustained contributions to public health and nutrition. In April of 2017, was celebrated by the Caribbean Association of Home Economics for his long and stellar contributions to Caribbean health and development. That she really should have been written, Contributions to World Health and Development. In 2014, he developed a unique postgraduate program in public health nutrition to train a cadre of leaders to address the problems of obesity and non-communicable diseases in this hemisphere. This training program has attracted several scholarships for deserving students from across the nation. Ladies and gentlemen, let us greet and honor Professor.
Thank you very much, Senator Hall Watson. I just met her this afternoon, and I'm glad for that applause because it really, I'm feeling a bit depressed because when I met Senator Watson, she says, "But you don't look like the picture in the book." So I said, which one looked better, in the book or me? And she refuses to answer. So I'm a bit depressed, so thank you very much for that applause. Anyway, Senator Hall Watson, it was a pleasure to meet you, and I think we have lots more to talk about. Dr. Glenn Beneby, representing the Minister of Health, PAHO WHO representative, Dr. Robin Roberts, thank you for inviting me. This important topic to share some views. Dr. Frankson, you are too qualified. This is why, you know, we weren't able to engage you at that time. But I can see that you have made it the right choice. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, students, Mrs. Messick, let me, is she still here? Yes? Royal Bank of Canada representative? She is still here. She left. I just wanted to say that it is really good that the private sector has actually come forward in a conference like this. We need more of particularly people in the financial sector. I always argue over the years that people in the, not only the banks, but in the insurance industry should be very much involved in topics like chronic disease because they stand more to benefit than the banks, actually. And I think that we need to do more in getting them involved in these types of occasions. But their contribution, I'm not giving a vote of thanks, but I think it's very important that the Royal Bank of Canada has come forward. Dr. Roberts, again, this is a very important topic you have chosen, and you asked me to talk about the challenges and whether we can meet them to curb obesity in the Caribbean. I would leave you, the audience, to decide whether or not we can meet these challenges. I have nothing to disclose, no conflicts of interest, and your CME code. Now, what I will talk about, I saw Professor Simeon already talking about the obesity problem, so I wouldn't go into any details of prevalence. I will just focus on the challenges, and I will ask the question, whether we need new weapons or we need new strategies, or both. Are we losing the battle but winning the war, or are we losing both? And I have some take-home messages. I was asked to talk for about 25 minutes. I will beg you an extra 5 minutes so that I can actually get through these. My presentation is going to be, I'll try to focus as quickly as I can on the key challenges that exist, and hope it will stimulate your thoughts about whether or not we in the Caribbean, we know obesity is a global problem, but we in the Caribbean, what can we do, what should we do to really meet them? This is a picture of family, yes, globally. See, the man is obese, the wife is obese, the child is obese, the baby is obese, and the little poodle is also obese. Oh, you didn't see the poodle, huh? Yes. And this is not unusual in families globally. But when we look at the Caribbean, we see a challenge, and you might have seen this, but this is the trend that we have in adult overweight and obesity, and it is rising by the decade. We see that females are about 75% either overweight or obese, and the males are not too far behind, they're catching up. In Bahamas, from the STEP survey in 2012, I think it was 50% frank obesity, and overall overweight was about 79%. So this is very much in keeping with these figures here. We do have a problem, particularly in women. And this brings me to the first challenge. Is the challenge in pregnancy. When you have so many women, obviously many of them are going to be overweight when they get pregnant. And when we look at the studies about what is causing obesity in young children, some of the solutions are, well, the causes are pre-pregnant obesity. And I'm just quoting some of the studies there. Obesity in pregnancy itself, maternal diabetes, maternal smoking from diabetes care, and also large birth weight. Excessive gestational weight gain, which has been pointed to as the most important factor, which is contributing to obesity in children. And as we know, the recommended amounts of weight gain, as highlighted by that most important risk factor, obese women are supposed to have the least weight gain, which is 11 to 20 pounds, which accumulates to about half a pound every week in the second and third trimester. And that is our first challenge, ladies and gentlemen. Having been overweight, and for whatever reason, you saw the figures, is it possible to really have a limitation of 11 to 20 pounds during pregnancy? So one study, or a group of studies, said we should reduce preconception weight. Is that possible? Our women are going to say, I'm about to get pregnant or planning to get pregnant, let me start losing weight. That seems to be great, but unlikely. Provide guidelines for weight gain and provide counseling during pregnancy, especially diet, seems great as well and more likely, but of course, very difficult. Regular contact with the health system it would require, and we know that women, in particular obese women, are keen to have healthy outcomes. So there is a possibility that we can meet that challenge. But that's a real challenge when we look at the amount of obese women that we have, and overweight women. So can we meet that pregnant obese challenge? Yes? No? Is it possible? No? All right. That's the first challenge. Some are saying, no, we can try. Now let us look at some challenges in early childhood. These are some figures for very young children, 0 to 5, in the Caribbean over a 10-year period. Underweight has been going down, but this has been happening this is young, very young children. We see our obese rates in a 10-year period. The global average is about half of that. We in the Caribbean are much higher than the global average as far as 0 to 5-year children, year-old prevalence are concerned. We know that breastfeeding is related to obesity. And the studies, 17 out of 21 studies, strongly suggest that breastfeeding represents an ideal window of opportunity for obesity prevention. Breast milk could influence the development of taste receptors and so on and so on. Artificially fed infants consume 30,000 more calories than breastfed infants by 8 months of age. And this is equivalent to 120 Mars bars. So what is the cost of milk replacement? And this is another challenge, the second challenge. Did a study recently in Jamaica, just been published. In fact, next week it's going to come out. And we looked at 4 different regions in Jamaica, and we looked at the cost of replacing breast milk. And we see it costs about $24,000. If you use fresh milk, if you use milk powder, $20,000. But we know that fresh milk and milk powder are not recommended for young children because of allergies and other problems. What is recommended is, of course, formula, and that costs $73,000, which is about $600 US. Now, this is if you replace breast milk completely. But we know that most women start breastfeeding and then they stop after about 2 or 3 months to go back to work, and many other reasons. So when we look at the general Jamaica pattern, and breasts are bad for business, right? Business people don't like breastfeeding, you know, it's bad for business. Where people breastfeed exclusively for the first 3 months and then they use formula feeding, then it still comes up to $10,532, about $80 US, to replace it under the normal practices that we have in Jamaica, and I guess the Caribbean, where most people stop after 3 months. And this is still less than the same all formula, 73,000. So breasts indeed are bad for business. When we look at that cost in relation to feeding a child, the Jamaica pattern, where they stop after 3 months. Now, we looked at how much money does that relate to in terms of the minimum wage in Jamaica. And you can see that it's about 41% of minimum wage if you spend money on formula feeding. This is after you breastfeed for 3 months. So a person in the minimum wage or low income category has to spend 41% of their salary for replacement. If you happen to be a clerk or a cashier, it's 23%. If you're a registered nurse, about 8%. And if you're a mid-level manager, about 6%. And for medical professions like you, maybe about 2%, because you get such a big salary. No? But what it means is that it becomes an economic issue. It's a financial issue. And the question is, can we meet the breastfeeding challenge? We know that the rates are going down globally, and it's going down particularly in the Caribbean. Can we go beyond the public health breast is best and complement it with the financial arguments? And that is what I think we need to start doing. Most mothers know breast is best, but they tell you that it's very difficult to breastfeed and so on and so on. Maybe another tack we can take is saying it can save you so much money, particularly in the low-income group. It's a lot of money. So let's look at the third challenge in later childhood. These are some figures from the Caribbean where we see overweight and obese in boys is 14 and 13, about 27%, and in girls about 33%. And the question is, what do we choose, right or left? And what does it cost? We did a study again in Jamaica to find out if in fact healthy foods cost more. I know there is general belief that healthy foods do cost more. Do they in the Bahamas? Yeah. You believe so? Is there work that was done showing this? Huh? You believe so? Yeah. Yeah. Everyone is going. Yes. Well, we wanted to look at the Jamaica situation to see if in fact that is true, and with a lot of methodology which I won't go into. And can the poor afford those healthy diets? What we basically found, because we look at it by food groups, looking at the, if we call healthy and less healthy groups, And the two columns really where it's not coming out clearly on the slide, but vegetables and food from animals are the ones where we found the big difference in terms of the healthy foods. And it came up to about 87 Jamaican dollars, which at that time was about 78 US dollars. And when we look at 27 studies around the world in 10 countries, we found that on average it was about $1.47 more for healthy meals. In Jamaica it was 0.78 more. It varied, of course. So yes, we found that it was in fact more expensive to eat healthy. And then when we looked again at healthy eating for the minimum wage earners, we see that if you had to eat healthy, it will cost about 106% of your minimum wage, which is, yes, about 59% of the, and that's just food, huh? That's just food. And this is the cheapest way of healthy eating in Jamaica, right? Not if you have all the right choices. If you had the cheapest way with a selection, this is what it will cost. Again, we see what happens when we go down the ladder. You will ask, well, how come $106? Because most people get remittances, and this is what helps, right? In making the remittances is the second income earner, if you like, foreign exchange earner in Jamaica after tourism. So this is what helps out. And of course, not every family is at minimum wage, and you have families with 2-3 income earners, which will make them. But as you can see, we use this not only as a vulnerability index, but we use this also as a poverty assessment tool, so that the powers that be can understand what, and this is just a family of 3, not a family of 5, which is normal. So we see that there is a challenge there. So can the poor afford these healthy diets in Jamaica? No. So what happens is that the less healthy diets, especially, this is one of the things that drives obesity, because what you can afford is in fact the most unbalanced meals. And that's what people gravitate to. So can we meet the healthy food challenge? When we looked at overweight and obese females around the world, this is from the World Health Organization in 2011, 15 years and over, we see that the highest rates, 82% of girls over 15 years. In Nauru, 82%, Tonga, 81%, and you come down to 67%, and you say, oh, that's the Pacific and the Middle East, and it has nothing to do with us. But when you see, this is the first 7 ranked countries, when you see the next 7 ranked countries, some familiar countries appear. This is the World Health Organization from 191 countries. We see that Barbados is there, Trinidad, Dominica, Jamaica, and the Bahamas is not too far behind, let me say. These are 15-year-olds, 15 plus. So are children excited about physical activity in schools? I don't think that they want to do too many push-ups, and I don't think they want to do too many sit-ups. In fact, when we look at sedentary level activities around different countries in the Caribbean, we see it ranging from 40% to about, what is that, 65%, 68% or whatever. It's a lot of sedentary activities in our schools, and this is, of course, a major challenge that we have. So how do we meet the physical activity challenge in schools? Can we make physical activity or education mandatory again, as some of us had it when we were in schools? Is that possible? Can we meet that challenge? Can we create an environment where play and exercise are actively enabled? Can we introduce physical activity programs not only for the athletically gifted, for everybody in the schools? Right now it's just, those who can play games and are good tend to do it, but we need it for everybody. We have to move the curve, right? We have to move, in fact, the other way, we have to move the curve from right to left, because we know that the obesity rates will impact on all. Encourage children to drink water as the most appropriate hydration fluid. Provide incentives to the private sector to invest in swimming pools and recreation facilities that are safe and enjoyable. Can we meet the challenges for nutrition in schools? Can we implement an inspection process to ensure food service providers comply with nutrient-based standards? Can we establish a meal pricing policy to blend nutrients with preferences? Integrate school food service and nutrition curriculum and training. Ensure business collaboration does not require endorsement of brands on school premises. We have a big challenge in Jamaica with branding and the private sector being involved in schools. In fact, there are 32 schools in Kingston where KFC and Burger King is the main supplier. They're on the campus. There is a canteen. All right, how do we get out of a situation like that? Require vending machines to stock bottled water, implement soda tax, and use income to improve school lunches. Offer incentives to manufacturers to produce food items that meet nutrition standards. Can we meet these challenges? Yes? No? Oh yes, good. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad that we have a group here that feel positive about this. But what we need? We need policies, we need the persons who are in authority to make these decisions and make them stick. But that's another issue. So can we meet the school challenge? I'm hearing a resounding yes. Good. In Jamaica, Senator, you were asking me before about the situation in Jamaica. These are I can't see the years, but anyway, these are I can't remember the years now, but I can tell you it's a 1% increase every year in Jamaica. Because when we look at the 45% in, I can't remember when it was, I think 2000, 53%, and the last study we did, in fact early this year, 60%. 1% increase. What does that mean? Jamaica has a population of 2.6 million. It means 200,000 persons in Jamaica are drifting into overweight and obesity every year. And this is not unusual for the Caribbean. Think about it, when you actually look at the numbers, 200,000 is 1%. So we have to beware. Because we know in men particularly, we know the impact of central obesity on the metabolic syndrome. And we know that there are risks. They look happy as well. And most obese people are happy, but there are risks with overweight, which I'm sure you heard about all through this meeting. In the Caribbean, the main causes of death in 2010, heart disease and hypertension 23%, cancer 21%, diabetes 13%, stroke 10%. I saw figures earlier where WHO said diabetes will be 7th ranked globally. I heard it in a presentation before. In the Caribbean, it was 4th, now it is like 3rd. Because obesity is rising so fast, and obesity drives diabetes in particular. So we are like 3rd in terms of the cause of death. Stroke, injuries, this is intentional and unintentional injuries. In Jamaica, we see on the news every night about the crime and the violence and how many people are hospitalized and died and so on. It's only 7%. We don't hear about the heart disease and the cancers and so on. HIV, fortunately, it's going down. I think that's 6%. It is going down. Deaths are going down. And the one in green, obviously, are those that are diet/obesity related. So we know the importance of obesity. I see tomorrow you have a whole session on obesity and cancer, and it would be elucidated more. So we see the very important role of obesity, and I'm glad that this is something that you're focusing on in this conference. It is, in fact, the most important underlying cause of death in the Caribbean. When we look at obesity and what can be done, We know that nutrition and physical activity play important roles. Sorry, I don't know why it's coming in like that. And we know that they can impact obesity directly. There is a part of obesity which might be related to genetics, hormone, and so on. But we know that obesity affects the chronic diseases. But what research has shown is that if we can actually implement nutrition and physical activity, particularly those two, we can reduce the polka dot section that much. We can actually prevent obesity, and in turn, directly and through obesity, most of the chronic diseases, and postpone many of those deaths from chronic disease. So nutrition and physical activity are critical, as we know. But the question is, how can we curb obesity and physical activity when we build communities with insufficient parks and recreation centers that are safe and attractive? How can we curb obesity through physical activity when our school policies have allowed a drastic reduction in physical education, which I talked about just now? How we can do it when few employers and work sites have a policy to increase physical activity and wellness? Few of them. Our transportation policies have favored the use of personal cars, which discourages physical activity. Note that these are not in the health sector. These challenges are not in the health sector, not one of them. So what does that say to us? What does it say to people who are graduating in medicine? You can only do that much, but you have a role to play because you have to work through your senators and other ministers so that we can get action in other sectors. Let us look now about diet. How can we curb obesity when our domestic agriculture policy lacks adequate incentives for the production of fruits and vegetables? Our imports encourage the consumption of high-energy dense manufactured foods. Our school canteens and vendors promote high-energy dense food with little nutrient value. Our local and cable networks heavily advertise fast foods, especially on children's programs. The cost of healthy options is unaffordable to many, as I showed in the 2 studies recently done. Note again, ladies and gentlemen, not one of these is in the health sector. Can we meet the challenge of obesity? Maybe this lecture is not for the medical faculty, right? But I'm hoping that as health professionals, we see the need to talk with other sectors so that they can recognize the importance of their policies and actions on a health problem. So the health sector doesn't have the answers to all the health problems. That's what obesity is saying to us. So the critical question is, and the critical challenge, is can the policy in one sector have a profound impact on another, like health? And the answer is resoundingly yes. Norway, a couple decades ago, had a runaway heart disease problem, but they did something around 1975 and turned it around. They put down some policy goals. They decided to decrease fat from 40% to 35% through gradual alteration. Decrease the supply of fat, replace foods containing starch, cereals, and potatoes, and limit the proportion of sugar in the energy supply. When we looked at between 1970 and 93, yes, it took 23 years. You see the turnaround that you saw in the graph previously. Notice that energy intake did not decrease. It moved from 2,800 to 2,900. The fat is the thing that actually decreased. Percentage from 40, they wanted 35, they actually reached 34. Carbohydrate actually went up. And the sugars actually remained the same or went up, if you like, 1%. So they were able to target fats with a program in agriculture that was dealing with a health problem. And they were able to turn it around. The question is, what are the nutrition goals to curb obesity in the Caribbean? Can we do similar things? If we do that to curb obesity, this is where we are now. That's where we want to go, 10%. Where do you think we are now? 14%. We need to knock off about 4%. That might look like a small percentage, but not easy to do, as you can imagine. And when we go through the different food groups, this is what we need to food from animals. We are 20. We have to bring that down to 15. This is the work I did from CFNI. For sugar, we are 8%. Right now, we are 17%. Sugar is our biggest problem. And it's not all fats, it's the type of fat, as you know, that we need to target. But countries can look and see what exactly their situation is one by one. But sugar is a huge problem. Because when I was in school many years ago, in London school, we all thought it was all fat. Now we know that sugar is probably the biggest contributor to obesity than anything else. Fruits and vegetables, that's where we want to be. Where do you think we are? We need to do something with fruit, particularly vegetables. Fruits is not so bad in some seasons, but vegetables, we're not consuming much of it. I'm just looking at by the food groups that we have. Legumes, yes, we need to move from 2 to 6%. Staples, from 39 to 47. So when we put it all together, what we want to do is to move from this pie where we are there on the left. This is our present consumption levels. Just putting all those figures together, and we want to move it to that area there. In so doing, we believe we can not only plateau, but actually turn around our obesity rates. These are nice figures and a nice pie chart, but as you can imagine, it's not easy to do, because what we're talking about, we need to talk about the impact on availability of foods, the accessibility of foods, and the consumption of foods. And those who know about food security know that these are three of the main pillars of food security. So that's what we're talking about, food security. And in fact, when we look at food security, the availability, accessibility, consumption, targeting obesity and chronic diseases, we see the factors in blue which are affecting those different pillars. And the policies that are related, import price policy, education policy, health policy, urban transport, and so on. So there is a public policy approach to curbing obesity. And of course, we need the food industry, which I put in red. I put it in red because they are critically important. We cannot talk about curbing obesity without engaging the private sector, particularly the food industry. The Director General of the World Health Organization, Margaret Chan, who demitted office earlier this year. In June 2013, she made a statement. Now, as you know, the Director General of the World Health Organization is perhaps the most important public person in the world, public health person in the world. And she came out in a statement to the General Assembly, and she says, efforts to prevent obesity and NCDs go against big interests of the powerful economic operators. It was good when she said that, because usually we don't hear those kinds of statements from the Director General of WHO. She went on, she said it's not just big tobacco anymore. Public health must also contend with big food, big soda, and big alcohol. Big pharma too. And then she said, few governments prioritize health over big business. Now, these are powerful statements from the Director General of WHO. And that's what we're talking about. If we want to curb obesity, that's the challenge that is in front of us. And I ask you, as graduates in the medical faculty to make sure that your colleagues in other sectors understand this. You can only remember that you're only dealing with the consequences of the problem. In terms of preventing it, it's in other sectors. It's big tobacco. What can you do? How many here are Bahamians? Do you have a problem? Thank you. Do you have a problem in, do you see, and forgive me, Senator, can your governments challenge this? You think it's possible? Big alcohol. What she says, big soda, big food. Yes?
I'm Prime Minister's a physician, and I use up my graduate.
Yeah, I know that. Yes, but he's a politician. But he is a politician, right? Anyway, I put it out to you. So when you ask me, Dr. Roberts, can we curb obesity in the Caribbean? I have to put it back. To curb it, we know what the solutions are. We know where we have to tackle. We know what we have to do. We have energy in the Caribbean of about 2,900 calories. Our requirement is 24, so we are in excess of 500 calories per person per day. And that 500 is mainly 150 from fat and 270 from sugar. In Jamaica, you would believe it, we always target the fast food, huh? And we talk at the Burger Kings and so on, but it's only 20% eat one fast food meal per week, whereas more than 75% drink one soda every day. That's the reality. And I thank the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, who is going to be talking. Maisha is here? She's here? Yes, she's there. Thank you for sending me these slides. They have put out some elegant work, and maybe she'll talk about it tomorrow as well when she talks about obesity in children. But it's 5 teaspoons that we need, which is about 25 grams for children. For adults, double it, about 10 teaspoons. Coca-Cola, if you look at the line below is the children, the one above is for adults. One Coca-Cola, you see how it takes up more than what you require for the whole day, just one. And you saw the figures about Jamaica, how 75%. When you look at Pepsi, look at Sprite, they're all basically the same thing. You look at 7-Up, you look at Fanta, you look at Schweppes. The requirement for children and adults. In Trinidad and Tobago, when you look at all of the sodas, I don't know if you can see the red lines, yes. You see that almost all of them, just one serving is over the child requirement and approaching the adult requirement. When we look at Barbados, when we look at Jamaica, and perhaps this is why in Trinidad and Tobago, the Minister of Education, I think, said that starting September, that just gone here, they are going to ban soft drinks in schools. Don't clap yet. Don't clap. Clap after we get the answer. Professor Simeon, has that happened?
It was supposed to happen.
See what I'm talking about? You see what I'm talking about? I don't know, right? I honestly don't know because I haven't spoken with. What happened?
Hurricane.
No, hurricane hit Trinidad. Hurricane never hit Trinidad. But it hasn't been implemented? Okay, but it's because of these figures why some Caribbean countries are making bold actions and statements, and I think they need to be applauded, even though it might not be implemented the right way at first, but I think the recognition by politicians that this cannot stand, it cannot go on. Those obesity rates are just too high. I hope it is implemented. The Minister of Education in Jamaica just made an announcement about 3 months ago that there's a thing we call bag juice, which is basically sugar water and flavoring. He said that he's considering getting bag juice out of the school program. Boy, they came down like a ton of bricks on him. And of course, that never happened. But by the way, I'm the chairman of the Food Industry Task Force in Jamaica, so you can imagine the situation I'm in trying to straddle between the Ministry of Health and the private sector, particularly the food industry. But these are the challenges that we face. Can we meet them? I don't know. We just have to, keep at it all the time. So when we look at, if we Google Kingston, those spots in red, if you can see them, are the fast food outlets. And what you see is green as places to do physical activity. I say no more. So should the food industry get involved? The answer is clearly yes. Because there is a business challenge. And this is another challenge we cannot ignore. When we're looking at curbing obesity, there's a huge business challenge. And if we want to know anything about business, I think Bill Gates is somebody we should listen to. And in 2014, he came out with a statement where he talked about creative capitalism. We know who Bill Gates is, right? Yes, of course. And he says a system where, this is his creative capitalism, governments and business work together to stretch the reach of market forces so that more people make a profit and also ease social problems. This is Bill Gates. He thinks that capitalism should be we should be creative in our quest for capitalism. He went on, recognition enhances a company's reputation and appeals to customers. It triggers a market-based reward for good behavior. Basically, he's saying that we should be more socially conscious as we make our profits. And you cannot argue with that. And he sees that this is the sustainable approach, and he was talking to his business partners. Does the global food industry agree with Bill Gates? Of course, yes, they do. Because when we look at PepsiCo, they have a tag of performance with purpose. And they said blind pursuit of profits is untenable. Agreeing with Bill Gates, of course. If communities suffer as a result of a company's action, those returns are not sustainable. And also today, profits are inextricably tied to the prosperity of its customers and consumers. So we see that PepsiCo, which not only produces Pepsi anymore, they produce a whole wide range of products and snacks. They are coming out and saying, Bill Gates, you are right. And they, of course, saying that we are working to improve the nutritional profile of our products and offer wider selection of nutritious foods. These efforts don't come at the expense of profits. And more than ever before, profitability and sustainability are synonymous. So PepsiCo says that they are in line. They had a goal of 2020 to reduce the average amount of added sugars per serving. And in 2014, PepsiCo said that they removed 434,000 metric tons of sugar from the US and Canada. But overall, there was an increase because they said that India and China had preferences for the sugar and so on. And they have... But we must applaud them because at least in US and Canada they made some efforts, right? But they said overall, don't knock it. Listen, anything coming from the private sector, I'm willing to grab onto, believe me, right? They're saying that, but they had targets. I didn't have time to go through all of them. They had targets for not only sugar, but fats and so on and so on. But is this too good to be true, what they're saying? We wonder. Because between 2000 and 2015, the same PepsiCo was antagonistic to public health in 28 of 29 court cases. Antagonistic to health. So it's going against what they said publicly. In 2011, marketing food for children, they opposed that. 2012 and 2015, GMO labeling, they refused to adhere to that. 2013, restrictions on junk food. Marketing soda and junk food in schools, they went against all of those. But guess what happened? Several universities decide now to withhold their contracts because they give contracts to universities. Okay? And what we saw happening just last year, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Academy of Family Physicians, the American College of Cardiology, and the University of Colorado returned the millions of sponsorship they got from PepsiCo. because they are making a protest, they're making a statement that you're saying one thing, but you're not really doing it. And I think this is important in meeting the challenge that we have. And this is curbing the business of obesity. I don't know if in the Caribbean we have the fortitude to resist those temptations and reject them, because it would be a good signal, I think, to the private sector that we mean business, especially in academia. So do we need new weapons or new strategies as I end? Both. Now, if we want to move from poor nutrition to good nutrition, it's like this stick man pushing this boulder up a hill. And the more he pushes, the more the resistance is against him, and he's never ever reaching good nutrition. In the past, we tried to help the individual by, in doing a lot of education and a lot of stuff, but we are not really getting very far. So what is the solution? How do we get that boulder over to good nutrition? Huh? Reduce the size of the boulder, but the boulder actually is getting bigger and is gathering more help to the individual. We can do that, but the resistance is really killing him. What we have to do really is flatten the hill. We have to flatten the wheel. In other words, we have to change the environment. That is really the target that we have. Changing the environment. And this is not only the Caribbean, it's globally, but particularly for us. Now, we talked about research to public policy. We know the health research brings out the recommendations, and we have treatment and clinical care, health education, and so on. What we have been doing, we've gathered a lot of evidence, and we're tired of seeing all the evidence that is there and the recommendations. We know what they are. We have been helping the individual, like the stick man, up that hill. What we have not been doing is changing the environment, which involves the guidelines and standards. It involves the industry I just talked about. It involves national policies and legislation. Is in that bracket, those three at the bottom, we really need to bring some action to change the environment. Let's look at the guidelines. Oh, well, before, we do a lot of staff training, education, and we do some work in schools and communities, but we have not been doing a lot of fiscal incentives and regulation and standards. So the past effort has been in this, where a lot of it has been at the top coming down, and in the future, we have to turn that around and do more of the fiscal incentives, regulation, and less of those. We still need, of course, the training and so on, but not as much. Whatever little money we have now, we have to use to really change the environment. So not what we should do, what we can do, but what we must do if we really want to curb obesity. Change the environment. Let's look at the guidelines. As you know, we have the food-based dietary guidelines, and in the Caribbean, we have developed guidelines for St. Vincent and the Grenadines, where they use the breadfruit, their national symbol, and we have those guidelines to guide everybody, the public manufacturers and everything. In St. Kitts and in Dominica right now needs more than dietary guidelines. Okay? They just need food. Because of the hurricane that just passed. Have you seen the pictures? But the guidelines will obviously help, and they have developed their guidelines in St. Kitts and Dominica. In the Bahamas, we use the drum here in the Bahamas, and in Guyana we use the stew pot, but all of them are showing you the dietary guidelines that are there. So in the Caribbean we have been doing pretty good as far as guidelines are concerned. Antigua and Barbuda, they use the pineapple, but they have their guidelines with their statements. In Grenada and St. Lucia, they have the coal pot and the nutmeg. In Barbados, we also have the map of Barbados with their guidelines. And you notice some physical activity around because it's not just the diet. And in Jamaica, they use the plate and they have the guidelines. So we have the national guidelines, which varies from country to country, and we've done pretty well throughout the Caribbean. As you notice, I understand Trinidad and Tobago, they are now working on theirs and so on. Food industry involvement. which is the second way of changing the environment. Product reformulation. Is that possible? In Jamaica, we have lots of companies now saying that they're taking 20% of sugar out of many of their products. This amount of sodium they're taking out, this amount of fat, and so on. And the task force I was talking about, we're now going to verify if in fact what they say they're doing. And when they say they're taking 20% out, we don't know the starting point. You take 20% out, but you're still way below where we really want to be, which is the national or the WHO standard. But product reformulation, the marketing, the labeling, the communication and advocacy. In France, Finland, Argentina, Brazil, government-led programs to reformulate products in the industry. The food industry themselves in the Netherlands led the effort. NGOs in Poland, Slovakia, Australia, New Zealand, Finland, and the UK, they have shown reductions from their efforts. In the Caribbean, we don't know what we're doing yet. We hear that there are pledges. What about marketing of foods to children? Are we powerless in this area? Is there anything we can do to reduce the exposure of children? We know how powerful marketing is in terms of children's consumption, particularly of sugary products. Are we powerless? I'm hearing no, I'm hearing yes. Powerless. In Canada, they have a law against this, Section 248 of the Consumer Protection Act. In Norway, Regulation 153 of the Broadcasting Act. In the UK, they have communication right. In Sweden, on Facebook, the ads must comply with local laws, licenses, and approvals. In the Caribbean, what do we have? Can we have anything? Can we limit cable companies? Forget our local broadcasters. Is there anything we can do with cable companies to limit the advertising that they have? We certainly can. 50, well in fact it's more than 50, it's all 90-something countries around the world regulate TV advertising to children. In Australia, they ban food ads less than 14 years old. Netherlands, they ban ads for sweets for less than 12 years old. In Sweden, they ban the cartoon characters to promote foods to children less than 14 years old. In the US, it's only on time. The United States says food ads may take up to 12 minutes per hour during weekdays, but only 10.5 minutes per hour during weekends. Well, we have to be thankful for what we get. The thing is that we're not doing much in the Caribbean. So countries are doing that. They're telling the cable companies and so on that we cannot really expose our children to this. We're not doing enough, but we can. We had big news in terms of food labeling in 2014. Former First Lady Michelle Obama came out. As you know, she has a big obesity program. And she says this is a big deal, not Burger King, big dealer. This is a big deal. It's going to make a huge difference to families. She is supporting a new food label. What will be new? Oh, you can't see it. They're going to be added sugars. Sorry, I think it's the different in thing is not coming out. They're going to be added sugars being put on the label so that people can make more healthy choices. They're going to take off vitamin A and they're going to put on vitamin D and so on and so on. In the Caribbean, we are trying through CrossQ and others to make a label that is, of course, more. It's very good, similar to the US label, because the manufacturers are saying we have to export and we don't want to be changing labels. But they have up to June next year, because this new label that is coming in, it's in June or July next year, 2018. And they are bashing me, well, me and the committee, to make sure that we adhere to what the US label is, because they are main exporters to the US. So we are having a meeting later next month to talk about exactly what the label is going to look like, at least in Jamaica, and through CrossQ to the Caribbean. But it's going to be very similar. The only problem we have is really they still insist in having vitamin D, and we don't believe we should have vitamin D on the label because of our sunshine. We prefer to have vitamin C which has antioxidants and keep vitamin A. So it's what's at the bottom of the label that is creating, but it's still a label that they might have to change. So these are the issues that will come up. As I'm finishing up now, this thing isn't even moving. In terms of label, can we also make it easy for people to understand? I don't know how many people read labels or can understand them. So can we have maybe a traffic light system to say red means that you eat sparingly, and green means that you can eat openly, and amber meaning that you gotta watch it. Something like that, so persons who can't really read the percentages and the numbers, they can get a good and a quick understanding of what they are feeding their families with. So we're looking at different types of labels to introduce in the region. And then finally, the last one is legislation. We see in Barbados they have implemented a tax on sugars, and it has moved from $5.70 to $6.10, which is a 7% increase. And right now they're talking about increasing that percentage to about 20%. This was introduced mainly by the Ministry of Finance, but I think the Health Ministry now is deciding that 7% increase is not enough. Because what happens is most of the companies absorb the small taxation, like what they did with tobacco. So we're not making a difference in terms of what people, so they get less profit, but the sales continue. So what we have to do is like in tobacco, where you make the tax about 70 to 75% must come from tax, and then the company say, no, we can absorb all of this. It has to be passed on. And then people hopefully stop, and of course enforcing it. But there's a move now to increase the tax there. We know that in Scandinavia, like I showed you in Norway and Finland, they have done this a long time ago. France in 2012, they have introduced a taxation on sugary drinks. 2014 in Mexico, 2015 Barbados and Dominica, they have in the Caribbean, they have introduced a taxation on sugary drinks. Belgium in 2016, 2017 Portugal and Britain was supposed to, they said next year. India, Philippines, Indonesia are considering it, and others are also considering it. Right now, Jamaica is considering it. Not going to make any statements, but the cabinet mentioned that it is likely to happen. So not this financial year, but maybe the next or the year after. But there are issues with taxation in terms of what is the contribution, what is the increase going to affect other foods, alternative choices and their costs, the elasticities of demand, the effect on the poor when you increase a tax. Are you punishing the sick because most of the people that are is going to affect our sick people? Is it inequitable? No substitutes for subsidies for other foods? Any World Trade Organization violations that you might encounter by putting on a tax on particular foods? So these are things. It's not a straightforward policy, but it's something that we are considering, at least in Jamaica, and I'm sure other countries will have to do that as well. And my final couple of slides relate to the policies to curb obesity. When we look at the regulations and standards, what I put in the first column is the potential impact from research studies. The evidence shows that you can have this kind of impact. And on the right column is whether it is feasible, politically, practically, and financially. So, can we require that calories and fat content be prominent on marketed foods? When you go to a restaurant or you go to anything, you should be able to see the calories and fat that they have on the display boards. Is that feasible? It will have a potential impact, and I think it is feasible. Fiscal policies to help families select more foods, not only sugar tax, but also fat tax and so on, that we know will make a big impact. Mexico shows us clearly, and it is certainly feasible if we work the details out. Restriction in the promotion of foods on TV and elsewhere would make a big impact, but is it feasible? Doesn't look so to me. The right-hand column is my personal opinion, all right? The first column is evidence. I just don't believe that in the Caribbean we're really ready to make a difference on the cable televisions and so on. Using the dietary guidelines that I showed you definitely will have an impact, and that is certainly feasible. This is on nutrition. In physical activity, activity, make compulsory physical education in schools. That will have a very big impact. Is it feasible? I think most of the schools and the school boards might protest more than any, and the school children. Because they're talking about the designer clothes now, and do you have, bathrooms to bathe and change and all of that stuff. When I was in school, we play football, we do gardening and so on, we go back and sit down in class. Not these children today. It doesn't happen anymore. Incentives to invest in walking, bicycle parks, introduction of sustained movements to get people moving. In Jamaica, we have a Jamaica Moves program that is doing pretty well, and I think that we can do that because we have a minister who is very, very capable and keen in pushing these things. So the key messages, ladies and gentlemen, to curb obesity, as I mentioned from the start, make the nutrition case in financial terms. Remember, I was talking about that in terms of breastfeeding and so on. Secondly, non-health sectors are more important to prevent obesity and NCDs, and we need to change the environment to enhance behavior. And finally, use regulations to improve nutrition and physical activity. So when we do a scorecard, obesity and pregnancy, remember that? Yes, no, can we? Is that a yes? It's difficult. I don't think any simple. Cost of not breastfeeding, can we use that as an incentive to make people breastfeed more and hence reduce obesity? Not in the Bahamas. They say no, some say yes again. The cost of healthy foods. Can we bring down the cost of healthy foods? No? Can we intervene in schools? We talk about what we need to do. Oh yes, there's a big yes on that. What about the business and the food industry? Can we definitely? Difficult. Some are saying it's difficult, some are saying yes. But I'm glad this controversy because it answers your question, sir. You see, it's half and half. Intervention in non-health sectors. Can we get agriculture and education and trade and so on? Yes? There's a big yes there. Regulations and standards. Can we introduce taxation easily? Fast food taxation? No? So can we curb obesity in the Caribbean? I am hearing yes, overall. But are we bold enough to change the environment? In other words, flatten that hill? We hear yes again. I say let's do it.
Going to have a few questions. We know that we have a time challenge, but we do want to have Professor answer a few questions for us. We'll start right here. Dr. Nuri.
Thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation. And it's a staggering one, actually, staggering, the facts that you gave us. However, it seems to me that in many of the presentations concerning the people's interests, it seems to me that nothing has been said about what the people should do. Not the government, yes, private industry, yes, and all those, but you've got to find out, you've got to go to the people and involve them in the decision. Now, I don't know how to do it. That's for technicians to decide. But if you are seeing your little baby, like the picture you showed of, I think that was Bertolucci, the painting you showed of the obese one. It seems to me that what has to be done is you've got to involve the people in the decision making, just like they vote in elections, just like they have to pay, for example, the car licenses. There's no, in the Bahamas at least, there is no special license cost for whether you live in Lightfoot Key or whether you live in Padolio Street. The license for your car is the same. So I think that, one, legislation is necessary, but I also believe that the people, now how do you do it? Maybe through the churches, definitely through the schools, and like you said, when you played football a long time ago, you know, you just went back into the classroom. I'm not sure you can do that today, but designer clothes in the classroom? I mean, no, the point I'm making is, who runs the show? The children or the schools or the parents? Unless the, then we become back to the slave plantation. If big business can tell me what to do, then I'm a slave.
$200 shoes, tennis to school.
Yeah, but I'm talking about lunch, for example, the greasy lunch in the schools. Why can't people make lunch in their homes and give it to the children to take to school instead of spending $7 or $8 a day? What I'm getting at basically is the schools and the people, the parents, both for themselves and for their children, have to make the decisions.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think everybody agrees that, you know, we have to involve the people. We have to involve families. We have to involve the persons that are affected in the decision making. You mentioned the schools. I don't know how many parents now prepare lunches for their children. They give them lunch money. And the lunch money they go and they use in the tuck shops, and they buy whatever it is. But your central point about involving the community and people, I think, is taken. Persons actually know what good or healthy eating is. They do know. But the point I was making in all these slides is that there are some structural barriers. There are some structural barriers in the environment, so that even if somebody is willing to change their behavior, we have to flatten the hill so that we make it more conducive for them who want to change their behavior to make. But if you think of a family right now, what are the choices they have? You look around you, they say the whole environment is obesogenic because everything they do is towards obesity. Big business, right? So yes, you have to involve the persons and you have to involve the families and the community. But there's a structural problem. This is why we need policies, and at some point it might have to be legislation. As how legislation is a very good friend of public health. We see it in so many areas, but we don't have legislation in diet yet. Okay? So your point is taken. But more so what in fact we're going to do later this year, as we attempt to introduce the taxation in Jamaica on sugary beverages, we're actually doing exactly what you're recommending. Find out how people, particularly the low-income people, feel about taxation, how much they're willing to pay more. If the taxation comes and they don't use that, what will they substitute? So we're trying to get that kind of information so the Minister of Health will have that kind of backing when he eventually introduces it. So finding out what the people want is really critical. I don't know if they did that in Trinidad when they decided they're going to have the taxation the banning of soft drinks in schools, because I can imagine them leaving school and they find the first corner shop and they, probably double up on the Pepsi that they didn't get in school. That is possibly, but it's the substitution effects and how will taxation affect it, because it's an economic issue as well. But I take your point about, understanding what people want, because it's particularly poor people, because anytime you have a taxation, it's going to affect poor more. The thing is, the argument is that more poor people are affected by obesity, so actually it will help them in the long run. And if you can take that, the funds generated to plow back into public health or even into schools program, it would be helpful. But no government I have seen, whether it's from the tobacco tax, they actually use it for health. They put it in the consolidated fund and they pay salaries and all. There's never, in fact, when we met with the cabinet, we talked about that because they raised the issue. How are people going to feel? They said, we are politicians. I said, well, most of the obesity is in the poor. So they are going to benefit more. So if we can actually, and they use the health services more than others. So if we can plow back the money from the taxation, which they will have to pay more or they're going to feel it more, into the health system, it will benefit them. Cabinet said, no way. If we get a taxation, we're not ring fencing any money that we get from any taxation. So that would be a good argument as well, because we can make the argument to the persons that we're saying, you're going to have better health systems and so on, but that's not a guarantee as far as politics is concerned.
How much support do you feel there is for national non-communicable disease commissions? Because I'm a former board member of the Health Carrier Commission, and I actually here. And one of the tasks of the coalition was to support the development of national entity. So I don't know what it's like on the Caribbean, but as my actual
Yes. Maybe she'll speak about that tomorrow. But the national commissions were set up as... Right. And you're talking about support from the government?
Yes, and sort of the community, the business community, because that's a huge...
Yeah. The business community, I don't know any commissions that really have strong support from the business community. And this is why they set up this task force in Jamaica, because we also have a National Chronic Disease Commission in Jamaica, which is multi-sectoral.
Right, that's the idea.
Right, it's multi-sectoral. But this was the task force really is to work directly with the food industry and health. But to come back to your question, the whole purpose was really to get the different sectors, what we're talking about here this afternoon, to really have an impact on a health problem. There is support in terms of head nodding, and yes, yes, yes. But let me tell you what the problem with the commissions are from my experience. One is very often when they have these meetings, they don't send high-level enough people to these commissions. What you really want are the chief technical officers from the different ministries to come and also be in a position to influence their ministers, their line ministries, and that's why you need them, because this is the action at that level. What I find is that most times they are lower level persons, you have the meetings and you have a lot of plans, there's never ever a budget behind it, and so it's there in theory, but it's not really acting as it should. What we want is, for example, what I think was very successful with the AIDS program, where we had a multi-sectoral committee, most of them centered in the Prime Minister's office, because AIDS is a literally sexy problem. And we had a lot of traction from high-level individuals on that. So we need that type of commission for chronic disease, and we have a better case to make for chronic disease than for HIV, as I showed in the slide. And I think what we need to do is to make that case so that we can put budgets behind the commission, have high-level persons coming to those meetings, and make some decisions that can really impact this problem, because those figures there that we're seeing, the increases that we're seeing, just cannot stand. I mean, what's going to happen if we're at 80% obesity now?
I suggest, last comment, I suggest that the people who are most aware of what needs to be done are the health people. But the health people also reflect the same thing in the community.
Yes.
We are overweight, we have a poor environment, and I think that we should take the leadership role and saying, listen, we can change ourselves.
Yep.
And therefore become advocates for the population at large now and influence them to influence the policymakers.
Yes, absolutely.
But I think what is lacking is that we in the healthcare industry who know what needs to be done, we are just not doing it. We are just as bad.
Right.
And I think, because I always make a comment that when the cigarette industry took over and when the big arguments came about, it was the British government, the British doctors, and their major campaign
Yes.
that led the war against the tobacco company,
Yes.
and showing in themselves that if they reduce cigarette smoking, what the impact was.
Yes.
I think we need to do the same thing in health.
Absolutely. Thank you for that comment. And I think not only reflecting it on our actions and our behaviors, but being the change agents to the other sectors. And my last comment, Madam, I see you're trying to wrap up. But I remember in the 18 years that I've been at CFNI, there is one particular meeting we had lots of meetings, as you can imagine. One that stands out to me is when we were able to get the ministers of agriculture together, Caribbean ministers of agriculture, to talk about what? Obesity and NCDs. It was a revelation to me, because things that I assumed that our ministers of agriculture knew, they were open and they were saying, my God, you're telling me the policies that I make in agriculture affecting obesity? And this is why we developed a thing called the St. Anne Declaration that came out after the Port of Spain Declaration in 2007. We had the St. Anne Declaration in Kingston, Jamaica, where our ministers of agriculture committed themselves. Of course, all of them. Fortunately, the Minister of Health we have now is the same Minister of Agriculture that was there then, and he's picking up on it. But what hit home to all of us at CFNI is that we are making assumptions that our policymakers are fully aware of the impact of their policy actions. And I think they committed themselves through that declaration to do more. And we probably will do the same thing with education and so on, because health problems are not solved only by health. In fact, less in terms of prevention. Of course, in terms of care and treatment, the ministry and the sector is critical. But in terms of prevention, it's more in agriculture, particularly trade, education, commerce, private sector. These are the sectors. So to curb obesity, that's what we have to do. And I think from this audience, I get the feeling that, so I'm not so depressed anymore, Madam Chair, from what you told me at the beginning. I feel more enthused now that this group is willing to go out there and change the environment.
Thank you so much, Professor. I think we can clearly say a tremendous amount of questions has arisen based on both presentations, but especially that of Professor Henry. There is still much work to be done. I know my eyes were opened in many, many areas. And I was glad that our hospital administrator and our managing director of the PHA were here to hear what it was we had to say, because as we all said earlier, no matter how much research we do, how much results we get, until that information is then transcribed into policies that are implemented and become sustainable, we're going to continue to be in the situation that we're in. So thank you all very much who has paid the price by staying the course. I know it's late, and I see that there are refreshments outside, so that we will still be here for, I'm sure they didn't count them, for a little while, and Professor Henry will be available to answer more questions that you may have. And since our fearless leader has given me the task of dropping Professor Henry to his hotel, I will make sure I stay as long as possible, so you could have as long as possible to ask the questions you need to ask. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Minnie.
No problem.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our second day of our Dynamic Research Day. Welcome, and without further ado, we will get into our sixth scientific session, that is obesity and cancer. I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker, that is Dr. Celine Heskey. She is an assistant professor of nutrition and program director of the MPH nutrition programs in the School of Public Health at Loma Linda University in Loma Linda, California. She completed her undergraduate and graduate work in dietetics and human nutrition, respectively, from Andrews University. In 2014, she completed a DRPH in nutrition at Loma Linda University, with a focus on applying nutrition epidemiological methods. Her recent and current research activities evolve around the effects of various nutrients and foods, including N3 fatty acids, nuts, and avocado, on adiposity and cardiometabolic health in the Advantis Health Study 2 population. Prior to working as a professor, Dr. Heskey worked as a clinical dietitian for Florida Hospital and Loma Linda University Medical Center. She will be delivering the keynote address, Can Cancer Really Be Prevented by What You Eat? Please join me in welcoming Dr. Heskey.
Good morning. I'd like to thank the organizers for having me here, and I'll go ahead and start. So the presentation I'm giving this morning is to try to answer the question, can cancer really be prevented by what you eat? This is a complex question, but first I'd like to just go over my disclosures. I only have one. I'm a co-investigator on a Hass-Avocado board grant looking at obesity and metabolic syndrome. And this is the CME information for those of you who will need to get credit for this. So the course key is diet and exercise, and the session key is liposuction. And I'll also show this slide towards the end of the presentation again. So the objectives this morning are to hopefully help you to understand current diet recommendations for reducing the risk of cancer, distinguish cancer sites most likely to be related to dietary habits and patterns, examine recent research evaluating the relationship between dietary patterns and cancer incidence and mortality, and understand mechanisms that may explain why foods and nutrients may prevent cancer. So the simple answer is yes. Cancer may be prevented by some of our dietary choices. And part of the reason that we can say this is that approximately 33% of cancer deaths are fueled by lifestyle choices, including poor nutrition, overweight and obesity, and physical inactivity, which feeds back into overweight and obesity. However, when we look at cancer etiology, it's multifactorial and very complex, and so I think a complex response is needed when answering this question. So when we look at the recommendations from the American Institute for Cancer Research, we see that of these 10 recommendations, a number of them have to do directly with diet. As you can see, they recommend eating well, focusing on a plant-based diet, reducing intake of red meat and avoiding processed meat, reducing alcohol intake and avoiding consuming excessive amounts of sodium, and also avoiding supplements. The American Institute of Cancer Research, along with the World Cancer Research Fund, have a food guide, This New American Plate, to illustrate that individuals should get most of their foods from fruits and vegetables, whole grains, and legumes. That should make up about 2/3 of the plate. And we are aware that about 20% of all cancers can be prevented if individuals have more of whole food choices, including fruits and vegetables. And they recommend a reduction in the intake of animal protein, making up no more than 1/3 of the plate. And then when we look at a recommendation from the American Cancer Society, what they're saying here is that for most Americans who do not use tobacco, the most important cancer risk factors that can be changed are body weight, diet, and physical activity. And this can translate also into recommendations for this region. And so the relevant recommendations by the American Cancer Society are to achieve and maintain a healthy weight throughout life, eat a healthy diet with an emphasis on plant foods, and if you drink alcohol, to limit your intake. So when we look specifically at cancer risks related to excess body weight and abdominal obesity, we can see there's a clear link between excess weight and cancer of the breast, colorectal, endometrium, esophagus, kidney, and pancreas. More specifically, abdominal obesity has been linked to breast cancer, colorectal cancer, endometrial, and pancreatic cancer. And there's also a possible link to cancer of the gallbladder and some of these other organs on the right-hand side of the screen. So what are the mechanisms that possibly explain why excess body weight may be related to an increased risk for cancer? As we can see here, one of the things is that excess weight increases estrogen, so this is a concern for women in terms of breast cancer risk. It also leads to a reduction in the hormone adiponectin, which increases insulin resistance, inflammation, and decreases apoptosis of damaged cells. When we look at insulin resistance, an increase in that corresponds with an increase in circulating insulin, and that increases insulin-like IGF-1 factor, and so that will contribute to a growth and reproduction of cancer cells and an inhibition of apoptosis, increasing the risk for cancer. In terms of inflammation, continuous low-grade chronic inflammation contributes to free radical damage of DNA. And deleterious effects on immunity can also happen as a result of excess adiposity. Moving on to alcohol, that's been linked to increased risk for breast cancer and also cancers of organs along the gastrointestinal tract, liver in addition. And there are some mechanisms to explain why alcohol intake may be related to an increased risk for cancer. First of all, ethanol is a carcinogen in of itself, and it facilitates the entry of other carcinogens into cells since it's a solvent. In addition to that, it's metabolized into acetaldehyde, which is another type of carcinogen. In addition to that, alcohol increases the reactive oxygen species, which can damage DNA, and it decreases folate absorption and increases folate excretion. You'll find that individuals who abuse alcohol tend to have a folate deficiency. In addition to that, it impacts estrogen pathways, basically increasing the circulating estrogen, which is the reason why it's related to breast cancer risk. So we'll take a look at some of the research that's been published that may help us to answer this question. This is a meta-analysis where they looked at comparing alcohol intake at different levels to individuals who do not drink alcohol or are only occasional drinkers. And here you'll see a substantial increase in risk for cancers of the oral cavity and pharynx, esophageal squamous cell carcinoma, cancer of the stomach, and also colorectal cancer. And here we can see that among reproductive organ cancers, there's a 61% increased risk for female breast cancer. But you'll notice even though there isn't a significant association for the cervix, endometrium, and ovary, they did not actually include an analysis of heavy drinkers in those studies, and a non-significant association for prostate cancer is at the bottom of the screen. And then when we look at these other organs, there's an increased risk for cancer of the liver, gallbladder, pancreas, larynx, lung, and also in terms of the skin, an increase of melanoma. But interestingly enough, alcohol intake has been shown to be associated with a decreased risk for certain cancers, including the kidney for moderate drinkers, the thyroid for moderate drinkers, and lymphoma. And when we look at the evidence that's available, the actual reasons for this reduction in risk is not fully understood currently. When we think about red and processed meat, there is evidence that it may increase the risk of cancer. Red meat is a good source of heme iron, which is normally a good thing. However, too much of a good thing can be harmful. And so high intakes of foods that contain heme iron can increase free radicals in the body, which damage DNA and organ structures, and it can also contribute to an increase in N-nitroso compounds in the body, which are carcinogenic. When we look at meats that are processed, so things like hot dogs, deli meats, and so on, nitrates are sometimes added to those foods in order to preserve them, and some of those foods are also cured with salt, and that contributes to an increase in the N-nitroso compounds, which are carcinogenic. And grilling of meat helps it to taste good. However, it contributes to the formation of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons and heterocyclic aromatic amines, which are carcinogenic. Other processed foods have also been found to be associated with cancer risk. And these are foods that have a lot of added salt. Also, if individuals are consuming a lot of excessive sodium in their diets. And the reason that this is thought to be the case is that that excess salt can damage the stomach mucosal lining, leading to increased cell hyperplasia, which eventually can lead to carcinogenesis. And in addition to that, excessive sodium intake increases H. pylori, bacteria in the stomach. And then there's a synergistic effect between continued high sodium intake along with the H. pylori and carcinogens. Fruits and vegetables are two food groups that are associated with a reduced risk for cancer. This reduced risk might be indirect, having to do with the fact that these nutrient-dense foods help with weight management. In addition to that, fruits and vegetables are good sources of fiber, vitamins and minerals, phytochemicals, which all may be protective against cancers of the gastrointestinal tract and the lung. And here we'll look at some evidence, this specifically having to do with colorectal cancer. This was a meta-analysis of different studies that looked at food groups and a reduction in risk of colorectal cancer or increased risk. So we see here that whole grains, fish, dairy, milk may be reducing the risk of colorectal cancer, whereas red and processed meat and alcohol are associated with increased risk. Take note of the fish because we'll see some cohort studies later on that sort of hint to this reduction in risk. And also note that dairy and milk are good sources of calcium, which have been found to be associated with reduction in risk of colorectal cancer. Fiber is another nutrient that can be associated with a reduction in risk for cancer. And that is partly due to several factors. For one, it may be helpful with weight management since it improves satiety, and this helps to improve insulin sensitivity, which has implications for reducing cancer risk. In addition to that, fiber can be fermented in the intestines, and this is associated with improved gut health, has an impact on gut microbiota, and it may help to lower the pH in the colon, which results in less harmful bacteria in that area. In addition to that, one hypothesis is that if individuals have regular bowel movements, this will help to decrease the exposure of carcinogens to the surface in the intestines. So let's look at some of the research that's been done. This is another meta-analysis of various studies that have looked at fiber. And we see here that in terms of all cancer mortality, comparing the highest versus the lowest category of fiber intake, there's a 14% reduction in risk for all cancers. And for every 10 grams per day of fiber intake, there's a 6% decreased risk in all cancer mortality. So kind of changing gears a bit, we want to look at dietary patterns for a number of reasons. One is that we eat a combination of foods and we're not just eating one particular food. Another thing to consider is that nutrients and other components of food interact to produce effects that may be synergistic. So this particular paper, they were looking at whether or not individuals adhered to certain diet quality scores, and I'm going to highlight the AMED score, which is basically measuring how much an individual's diet is similar to the Mediterranean diet, and you'll see that those individuals had a decreased risk of having cancer deaths for the highest quintile that was matched to the diet quality scale. And the data for this study came from a sample in the United States. In this particular study, which was from EPIC in Europe, you'll see here that anyone who closely adhered to having a really high quality diet had a decreased risk for cancer mortality, so pretty similar results. And when we look at the World Cancer Research Fund scale, which includes diet and also physical activity, we'll see here that for every quartile that's higher in terms of matching the scale, there's a reduce in the risk of cancer over time, the risk of cancer. The Mediterranean diet is considered to be a plant-based type of diet by some researchers. And in this particular study, they found that looking at various studies where they've examined the relationship between Mediterranean diets and risk of cancer, that there's a reduction in the risk related to adhering to a Mediterranean diet. When we look at site-specific cancers, we can see that there's a risk reduction for colorectal cancer, liver cancer, and quite substantially for respiratory cancers. So vegetarian diets have been studied to see whether or not they could reduce cancer risk. And I'd just like to start by saying that it's important to understand the definitions of different vegetarian diets. This definition comes from the Adventist Health Study, which is housed at Loma Linda University. And as you'll see here, the pesco-vegetarians are individuals who have fish but don't eat any red meat or poultry. Lacto-ovo-vegetarians may eat eggs and or milk, and vegans don't have any animal food products in their diet. And then semi-vegetarians are individuals who do consume meat, but they consume much smaller amounts than a non-vegetarian. So looking at this meta-analysis of observational studies, we can see that when it comes to overall incidence of cancer, vegetarians have a 8% reduced risk and vegans have a 15% reduced risk. And we look at this meta-analysis looking at certain specific sites. We see that for colorectal cancer, the vegetarian diets were examined here. Overall, there wasn't a significant reduction in risk, but there were only 3 papers that were examined here, as you can see. But there was a reduction in risk among pesco-vegetarians and those on a semi-vegetarian diet. Remember earlier, we saw that there was a risk reduction related to fish intake. For breast cancer, based on this meta-analysis, there wasn't any significant reduction in risk related to vegetarian diets. And for prostate cancer, we also didn't see any significant results. When we look at some of the specific cohorts that include vegetarians, like the EPIC Oxford cohort, which also includes the Oxford Vegetarian Study participants, we see that among fish eaters, there was a reduction in risk for all cancers and also cancers of the lymphatic and hematopoietic origin, the stomach, ovarian, and prostate cancer. And among vegetarians, there was a risk reduction for all cancer, bladder cancer, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, multiple myeloma, stomach cancer, and ovarian cancer. There were some null findings, but as you can see, there was a risk reduction for several sites. Still looking at EPIC Oxford, this is another study that was done later, and looking at risk of death related to cancers, they found that among low meat eaters, there was a reduction in risk for pancreatic cancer. Among fish eaters, there was a reduction in risk for malignant cancer, and among vegans and vegetarians, there was a reduction in risk for cancers of the lymphatic and hematopoietic origin, and also pancreatic cancer. Now, the Adventist Health Study is a interesting cohort study that includes subjects from Canada and the United States, and it has an oversampled population of Black or African American subjects. The primary aim of this study is to look at the relationship between lifestyle factors and cancer, and you will see here that approximately 50% of the cohort members follow some sort of plant-based dietary pattern. So when we look at some of the research that's been done in this particular cohort, we see that after about 4 years of follow-up, that individuals who are vegan had a reduction in risk for cancer incidence, but when this was put into categories of men and women, we don't see any significant results. But as I said, it's just 4 years of follow-up, and in some cases, there aren't a lot of subjects who have already been diagnosed with cancer. When we look at cancers of reproductive origin, we'll see that for female cancers, there's a reduction in risk among individuals who are vegan. And when we look at cancers of other organs, we see that those of the gastrointestinal tract, for lacto-vegetarians, there was a reduction in risk, but none for the respiratory tract organs and also the urinary tract. Moving on to some more recent research that's looked at colorectal cancer risk, they found that vegetarians have a reduction in risk for colorectal cancer of about 21%. When it was split into categories, either colon or rectal, you can see a trend towards a reduction in risk, but the numbers are smaller in those categories. When we further break down the dietary patterns, the plant-based dietary patterns, we can see here that the pesco vegetarians have a 42% reduction in risk of colorectal cancer, which is a trend that we've seen in other research studies. They've also looked at breast cancer as an outcome, and in this particular case, they didn't really see any significant results, except for this peculiar 95% increased risk among semi-vegetarians. But I'll say that in the Adventist Health Study cohort, semi-vegetarians make up the smallest proportion of groups of dietary patterns. When we look at prostate cancer, we see that among vegans, there's a reduction in risk for all participants when grouped together, and this is sustained among the white participants. There is a trend towards a lower reduction in Black participants, but this is not significant. And when we look at cancer mortality in the Adventist Health Study, currently we don't see any significant results, but the follow-up has only been for about 6 years. So what is the role for nutrients and other food components in inhibiting carcinogenesis? What we find is that various nutrients and phytochemicals can have an impact on inflammatory response, apoptosis, DNA repair, and so on, which can reduce the risk for cancer. In addition to that, it should be noted that antioxidants can help to protect from damage to genes, and this is by inhibiting genetic damage to normal cells and inhibiting further damage to cells that have been initiated in the carcinogenic process. The nutrients and food components that are important in this particular case include vitamins C and E, phytochemicals including carotenoids and polyphenols, and selenium as a part of glutathione peroxidase enzyme, which helps to reduce oxidative damage. And the foods that are rich in antioxidants tend to be fruits and vegetables. It should be noted that supplement use is not recommended when it comes to these particular nutrients. In addition to that, these bioactive components and vitamins and minerals can help to repair DNA and keep it stable, especially folate, which is found in fruits, vegetables, legumes, and whole grains. And selenium can be derived from nuts, fish, and grains, and allyl sulfur compounds come from garlic and onions. Another cancer protective effect is cell cycle arrest and apoptosis, and some of the nutrients and phytochemicals that are responsible for that include selenium, curcumin, which is becoming very popular, can be found in turmeric, indole, 3-carbinol, and sulfurin compounds from cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, kale, and so on, and then allyl sulfur compounds. There are some epigenetic effects that also have an impact on reducing the risk of cancer, and these come mainly from various vitamins, including folate, and different phytochemicals, including those I mentioned previously, along with genistein from soy, and resveratrol, which can come from grapes and berries. And folate is very important in terms of DNA stability and repair. It's very important in terms of suppressing cell division and silencing gene expression, as it provides methyl groups to the DNA strand. And in addition to that, when there's a deficiency in folate intake, that has an implication on pyrimidine and purine biosynthesis, which means there's a reduction in gene repair. And it also has implications in terms of the methionine cycle, which leads to hypomethylation of the DNA and proto-oncogene activation. And all of these different factors increase the risk for carcinogenesis. Additionally, hormone regulation can be impacted by various foods. For instance, there are foods that may alter estrogen regulation, and that includes phytoestrogens from soy and indole 3-carbinol from cruciferous vegetables. In addition to that, fiber has an impact where it may reduce insulin and also the reabsorption of estrogen in the intestines. Additionally to that, the gut microbiota has implications in terms of the overall health of the gut, and also some metabolic changes. So what we find is that fibrin-resistant starch can be fermented in the gut, and that contributes to butyrate formation, which helps with colon cell development and a decrease in inflammation. And that has implications for reducing the risk of cancer. So I mentioned previously that supplements are not recommended in terms of general recommendations, and also in terms of bioactives. And part of that is that there's no evidence that supplements lower the risk of cancer. Additionally, they've found that folate accelerates proliferation, tumor growth, and this is after carcinogenesis has been initiated. Additionally to that, high doses of beta-carotene and vitamin A supplements, calcium supplements, and vitamin E supplements have been found in some research studies to actually increase the incidence of certain cancers. And then finally, what about organic foods? Because there is a trend towards recommending those for reducing the risk of cancer. It is true, at least in the US, that the definition for these foods means that they should be free from antibiotics, hormones, and pesticides, which helps to reduce exposure to certain substances that cause cancer. And they're not irradiated, even though irradiated food does not have radiation in it. But some of the issues are that, at least depending on the region where you live, there may not be regulations about organic food. Organic food, at least in the US, tends to be more expensive. and not everyone has access to it. Additionally, some of those foods may still be processed with salts, like I've seen sausage that's organic, but it's still processed with salt. And then there's a lack of scientific evidence of a link between organic foods and the risk of cancer. But I'd say, having grown up in the Caribbean, a lot of people do grow their own food and have their own animals. So this is one way that they can consume food that's more organic. So I would recommend an emphasis more on whole foods and avoiding processed food items. So closing thoughts, basically, short answer is yes. What we eat can have an impact on our risk for cancer. However, there's still a lot more research that needs to be done, especially in terms of understanding the mechanisms that explain this reduction in risk. So if there are any questions, I'm open for that now, and I'll also open this slide where you can get the information for getting credit for this session. There's a question at the back. A mic. Oh, she's at the back there.
Good morning. My question just was that your studies talk about the pescatarian diet, which could be inclusive of other seafoods. So in your studies, are they equating the concepts that have to do with fish and the other seafoods the same? Or are there differences with the other seafoods, considering in the Bahamas we tend to be branded as an area that has higher rates of cancer, and our diets are inclusive of other things, especially lots of conch and the other like shelled seafoods. Is there a difference?
That's a very good question. I'll answer that partly in the context of the Adventist Health Study. Now, most people who are Adventists don't eat shellfish. So the fish that they're consuming tends to be whitefish or fatty fish like salmon and so on. So fatty fish especially has already been found to be beneficial in terms of reducing chronic disease risk. So it's kind of hard to fully translate that to all seafoods. And it is true that in some cases, some shellfish can have toxins in them, and so I think we need to really investigate what it is that's in some fish that's reducing risk, and to also evaluate what are the risks associated specifically with shellfish. And when it comes to the Oxford cohort, which is the other cohort that does have a substantial amount of vegetarians and fish eaters, I don't recall exactly how they distinguish between someone who eats a lot of shellfish versus regular fish, or if they even did that distinction. But I know at least for Adventist Health Study, those fish eaters aren't really eating any shellfish.
Yes, thanks for the excellent presentation. I really enjoyed it. I have a question. You indicated, you made a very strong argument of the importance of fruit and vegetables as protective of cancers. In the Caribbean, we know that 95% or so of people do not eat the recommended 5 servings.
Which is surprising.
Yes, the question is, which seems to be the norm, you know, people just don't eat that. How do you suggest we address that? Is it that 5 servings are really too high and it should be perhaps 1 or perhaps 2, or is it that we really need to get to that level, and if so, how do we get there?
Well, I think there are 2 answers to that question to begin with. First of all, the serving sizes are actually not that very large. It's about half a cup of fruit. And I do know there are people in the Caribbean who eat quite a bit of fruit. But I think part of it is that when we're measuring fruit intake in the Caribbean, I think we have to probably make sure it's more quantitative in terms of the actual amounts. And when we're doing comparisons in terms of the recommendations, we need to make sure that it's equivalent, because say someone has like a decent sized mango, that's 2 servings of fruit right there. If you have a banana and it's one of those fairly, medium-sized bananas, that's another 2 servings of fruit. So I think it's very easy for people in the Caribbean to increase their fruit consumption if that's an issue. Vegetables can be a little bit more problematic, but I think part of it is helping people to understand how they can use those vegetables and getting them to enjoy them, especially without a lot of added salt and fat and things like that.
So it is possible to increase it?
Yeah, it is possible, but I think public health nutrition campaigns are very important. So having commercials on TV where they're talking about increasing fruits and vegetables and that being associated with reduced risk for disease, and also doing cooking demonstrations, which I know I'm from Antigua and I've seen them do that on TV to get people to eat healthier, and those can be really effective in terms of getting the word out there.
Wonderful. We have a question from Dr. Bloomfield.
Yes, good morning. Excellent presentation. I imagine that if the diet begins from birth and you practice it throughout, the problem we have is commonly when people start to address some of these issues is when they become overweight or obese, and so they yo-yo. Is there like the latest starting point where you can get the maximum benefit for this? Any possibility of this from your studies?
That's a good question. I don't know the exact answer to that, but what I could say is that preventing weight gain when you're an adult is very instrumental to reducing risk. And the problem is that has been very hard to do, and we see an increasing trend in the number of individuals who are overweight and obese. So I think it's just basically getting individuals to understand that as you get older, you actually have to increase your physical activity, and you have to be very cognizant. Is that me? You have to be very cognizant of your choices, so making sure you eat more nutrient-dense food items. But I would say it's never too late to lose weight. I've known people who towards their midlife, they have lost substantial amounts of weight and have been able to keep it off. Keeping it off is the most difficult part. And so what we need to figure out at this point is how can we have individuals lose weight and sustain that weight loss even though their metabolic changes that kind of challenge that and cause them to regain their weight.
Thank you. We have time for one more question before we move on to the next speaker.
Thank you very much. I think that that was an excellent paper. The question for me is, given the island composition of the Caribbean, the island composition of the Caribbean, I am just curious to know, has any study been done to show the relationship between preserved meats as we did it? In other words, traditionally in the islands of the Bahamas, before they had all the refrigeration, there was salting, for example. Was there any study done anywhere that showed the relationship between, for example, let's say Cat Island or Crooked Island compared to, say, Nassau in the frequency of certain types of, say, intestinal cancers?
I'm not sure. I haven't really looked at that. Actually, in doing this presentation, I did try to see if there are lots of studies that have been done in the Caribbean. In general, when it comes to nutrition, we're lacking a lot of research. That's something that needs to be addressed. But what I will say is that, yes, it's true, like my grandfather, he used to do like his own salted meat. And the issue with the salted meat is that regardless of the process that's used, that excess salt is what is contributing to damaging like the gastrointestinal tract. But definitely we would need to see if, more traditional methods of doing that have a different impact than what food manufacturers do. There might be some usefulness to that. I just wanted to let you all know that next February, Loma Linda University is having a International Congress on Vegetarian Nutrition, and there's some cards at the front desk if you are interested in that. And that's it. Yeah.
Thank you. Our second speaker is Dr. Glenn Jones. He is an associate lecturer and an epidemiologist and radiation oncologist here at the University of the West Indies in the Bahamas. Dr. Jones is a clinical epidemiologist and radiation oncologist practicing in the Eastern Caribbean as well. He is a scientific officer for a number of randomized trials conducted by the International Atomic Energy Agency of the United Nations in cancers of the esophagus, breast, cervix, rectum, and lung. He is an internationally recognized expert in mycoides fungosus, and as a teacher, he has mentored over 100 students and staff in 50 research projects. He will be speaking to us this morning on experience with an advocate-led, community-based breast cancer screening fair in Antigua and Barbuda. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jones to give his talk.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. Thanks for coming. I just wanted to describe the experience of this advocate-led community-based breast cancer screening fair in Antigua and Barbuda. This is the first sort of report of the activity, and it's regarding the 8th time it was held. So it's an annual fair, so this was a well-developed community-based project, and I'll talk about how we evolved it into and got some data on it. So nothing to disclose, and that's the code for the session. So the island context is that Antigua and Barbuda has a population of about 85,000 people and a small economy. But breast cancer incidence is the highest cancer that presents, probably somewhere between 60 and 80 women per year out of the 120 to 160 cancer cases per year in terms of incidence. The mortality is also relatively high because it doesn't have a systematic national imaging screening program. So we see mostly locally advanced disease or metastatic presentation and consequently lower survivals. So there's several private imaging facilities and a public hospital, Mount St. John, which from the Halberton Hospital became the new hospital in 2009. It has ultrasound and mammography, and in fact went to digital mammography about a year ago. Has about 1,000 or 1,500 screens per year, which is reasonable, but this is really physician-centered screening. In other words, patients are seen by different physicians, and then they say, oh, you're in the screening group or whatever, they send them in. So it's not an actual screening program where people can just show up, or they're actually encouraged to show up. So a civil society response to a deficiency in a government service or a private service is to consider strategies. A recent review article, about 145 civil society organizations around the world looked at their roles in terms of promoting screening and so on. Unita Bird there in Antigua led the formation of Breast Friends with some colleagues, most of them survivors of breast cancer, and instituted an annual clinic commencing in 2009. It was located in St. John's, the capital, which is about 35,000 of the population lives within a short distance of downtown. It was done in the downtown Lions Club facility. They do the marketing and the administration. Lions provides support and water bottles for the day. And on the day, about 2 to 9 healthcare workers, predominantly physicians, but occasionally a nurse, and 2 to 5 American University in Antigua medical students and faculty. So up to 30 students, up to 5 faculty. And these would provide breast health education, breast self-exam teaching. The physician volunteers to do the clinical breast exam, and then if required, imaging referral and a no-cost voucher is provided to go. So the copay, which is a nominal 20 or 30 EC or $6 or $10 US, is actually waived. They get the voucher, and so they then can go and get the test in the next few weeks. Now in 2015, it grew to 108 clients attending the fair, so it took most of the day to get through the 108 because there was only a couple of physicians. So we only had 3 screen-in gurneys. There was issues of confidentiality. As I said, it was a long wait to actually get through the final step of the screening. So there are some opportunities because we introduced a new cancer center to the 9 countries of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, the OECS. That opened in July of 2015. And so what we decided that in the following following year, I attended the first fair because I arrived, and that Saturday I was in that fair and I was the one doing most of the exams. So we said for the following year, we really needed a better venue, operationally improve the amenities, client confidentiality, get consent for the event for Breast Friends, a written consent, compartmentalize the various stations of a patient or client evaluation, split up the waiting times and dwell times, and lower the overall wait time. So in addition, the prior 2 years had used a non-validated 3-page but on a relatively complex form about factors about breast cancer to assist the physicians and others in assessing the patient. So we decided to reduce this to a 1-page form and actually with no client ID on it, and focus on risk assessment. So the revised form included age, any presenting symptoms or signs, height and weight for BMI calculation, which is required with the age to go into the Harvard Disease Risk Index, which is available online. It's been validated with several publications. It's adaptive in terms of the number of questions to be answered, and there's 22 questions in total, 2 about the client's history, like the age and the BMI, 1 about a cancer history in yourself, 5 family history questions, 6 lifestyle questions, 3 to 5 reproductive ones, and 3 clinical history questions. So the CBE also needed to be documented in terms of what was found. There were check boxes for its normal or abnormal, as well as space to write in what the abnormality was for the requisition if imaging was going to be done. And then there were check boxes to declare preventive counseling and BSE teaching, a declaration if there was an image referral so that the voucher could be generated for the client on exit, and signatures of several people who were involved in the process. So the actual event was held, for the index event that I'm going to talk about, was held on October the 8th, 2016. Breast Friends did the marketing and advertising for the week prior to the event. On-day registration was from 8 to 12 by order of arrival, including getting ID, written consent page for attending this so-called clinic, and also to allow some data analysis, more for analytics. Clients were guided through stations by the medical students to complete the form and do the prevention and counseling sessions. And after risk assessment was done after that with the online access to the HDRI, where the medical students interviewed the clients and went through the up to 22 questions, entering that online, and then got the final risk score that's generated. And rather than printing out the answers to the questions, simply documented the risk score. So that's how that went. So the basic observations for this clinic is that we went from 108 people to 155 women and 2 men who attended this one. We actually reduced the event duration from 8 to 4:30 down to 8 to 3. So it was successful in being able to accommodate more clients and do it in a more efficient manner. Overall, only 13% received neither of breast self-exam information or counseling. Usually that was because they already knew information or simply declined to receive those services provided by Breast Friends and the AUA faculty. And in the end, 21 or 13% were referred for follow-up imaging, 6 ultrasounds and 15 mammograms within the next few weeks. And we didn't follow those individuals, but according to Breast Friends in their follow-up, no cancers were detected. So you would expect to find 1 or 2 per 1,000 women. Even in a very high-risk scenario where you only have high-risk women, it might be 1 in 100. So since we had 155 women, we only sent some who actually had lumps or something to go and get the imaging. That's probably why we didn't find any cancers, as you should expect. So the study methods for what I'm going to specifically talk about is the proposed reuse of the data from the 1-page form for analytics using STATA and two-tailed p-values for associations. Do presentation and statistical report was reviewed and approved by the Breast Friends executive almost a year ago. So I had several hypotheses going into this. A large client majority would have a BMI over 25. The BMI would be associated with greater age. A simple majority would be in the screening age group. A majority would have a high, average, or greater risk for breast cancer. The risk might be bimodal because we know that sometimes worried well individuals, somebody who's 25 but worried about breast health, might show up to such a clinic even though they're not routinely for screening at that age. And imaging referral generally should be around 10% with people who are trained to do clinical breast exam in a general screening mode. If it's untrained individuals, it's usually 2 or 4%. So the client characteristics are shown here. So in terms of BMI, 70% were actually overweight or obese, and the p-value for that shown there. So obviously it's great, it's a majority. But interestingly, BMI was not associated with age because there were these other underlying factors that promoted young people to come in, including perhaps that they were obese or family histories and so on. The age distribution is shown there. The ones that are highlighted in red are those that would be mainly targeted for screening, screening starting and then doing it. And that shows that, in fact, the total number is about 50 to 60 or 70% that were actually in the proper targeting group. So 26% or 1 in every 4 clients was underage from the perspective that they were under 35. So risk stratification by the risk index goes from a low level of risk, which is 1, to 7. And so the descriptors attached to that, extreme low risk to extreme high risk, are shown there, and the number of individuals that fell into those categories is shown. And what you can see is that there's 2 modes, the mode of number 3 and number 5, with slightly fewer people in the average. And average and above is actually over 52%. So that's what was sort of predicted at the beginning. Now, in terms of symptoms and signs, there's non-suspicious client concerns, there's suspicious client concerns, and then there's no concerns whatsoever. So just looking at the green, which is no concerns, green light, probably don't need much, there's 103 or 66% of the attendees. So they went basically for asymptomatic CBE by the physicians. The suspicious client concerns are lumps and lymph nodes, and there were 14 of those, and 12 of those were confirmed on CBE. There was also, and discharge is rare, even as a presenting sign of cancer. There was 2 cases with that, heavy and swelling. And then non-suspicious client concerns are the tenderness, pain, tingling, and unspecified. So in terms of referrals, self-reported symptoms and signs and the risk level were not statistically associated with the physician conducting the CBE. So in other words, the patients, the clients coming through were pseudo-random or quasi-randomly allocated by students into the rooms because the physicians were rotating in for an hour or 2 to do what they were doing, so different times of the day, and there were 3 or 4 rooms active at any one time, and the individuals went to the next available. So it was quasi-randomized. So as a result, the reporting symptoms and signs, those 33% of the women who were complaining of something, their risk levels, and all of these things were actually evenly distributed across the physicians. In effect, it looks like a randomization, which it's not. But the referral to imaging was associated with the clinical breast findings, which you'd expect, but referral was not associated with the HDRI level. So in other words, that background level was not predictive. So the findings were predictive to send to imaging. Referral, however, was strongly associated with 2 of the physicians. So they sent 12 of 18 patients they screened versus 9 of the remaining 139 screened by the other 9 physicians. It's well understood that different individuals are going to take a different agenda. Like, I should just send all women because they should all get free mammograms. Or, you know, I'm highly trained and I'm going to highly detect things that are false positives, so I'm going to send all of mine. So we know these factors are operative. So the p-value just proves that they were operative with these individuals. Additional findings are with self-selection for attending, broadly there were 3 groups of clients. The younger, some with breast health concerns, but other factors like a family history or BMI, they were kind of worried well and they wanted more information. There was the older group who were at risk and required routine screening, and then there's that small group who have suspicious presentations. And risk stratification, however, was relatively simple to use with the online tool. So this is a community-based and advocate-led fair. It has an abiding presence in the setting of a no systematic national program for screening. The 2006 event provides benchmark data and insights to optimize the fair. For example, optimizing may mean fair multiplication and then differentiating the fair into sort of a worried, well, younger population and a routine screening who require CBE, for example. Also, available same-day imaging may be effective, and in-event management, meaning better organization of the team so that there's less, you know, it runs much more smoothly. Follow-up clinics could also be identified for high-risk individuals who are found through the screening process, because then they could go on to secondary assessments with diabetes, genetics, complete family history, and using other risk models beside the HDRI, the more complex tools that are available require probably 30 or 40 minutes to use, and you can't do that in a screening fair like this. So our recommendations will be to target fairs and hold several slightly different ones during the year for focus, resourcing, and efficiency along the lines that I've mentioned. Greater emphasis can then be provided for prevention and BSE training in individuals who are under 35, and then you can focus more on making sure that routine imaging patterns are present in the individuals who are at least 35, if not 40. Same-day imaging option is going to happen this year. In a couple of weeks, and I think you can introduce definitive research projects with ethics approval and interventions such as you could pull out randomly individuals going through the clinic and ask them about their perceptions of their own risk, because they probably don't know what it is. So you could do those kinds of studies done in an organized way. So thank you very much.
We'll take some questions now from the floor.
Well, for the younger women, it would be ultrasound or MRI, and for the on-site, yes, it's going to be 5 ultrasounds and about 10 mammograms. Yeah. Yeah, the techs are donating like 4 hours each. I think there's 2 of them at the hospital. Yeah. So the one of the questions that might come up is the role of a CBE, because the guidelines in America and that tell you that doing a clinical breast exam is useless, and so you shouldn't do it. Right? Doing a clinical breast exam really is pointless because you're going to send too many for imaging studies, and it's a waste of time. However, there is a study from Quebec which shows that about 6% of all the breast cancers in Quebec, which has a routine systematic screening program, were actually triple negative and found only between routine imaging and were found by CBE. So they feel that there is a role to play, and in a place like Antigua, where patients present with more advanced disease and there's more triple negative, it's reasonable to consider CBE to be a component of routine screening.
Dr. Chin.
Thank you. As you know, there are many different recommendations for breast cancer screening. What is your recommendation for the Caribbean and especially for the Bahamas?
Well, if there's a family history, you probably start with a routine mammogram at 35, and then right now the current, a couple of weeks ago it was revised that yes, indeed, every woman over 40 should probably have mammography. If the breasts are dense, then MRI is required. Too many false positives, but that's appropriate. Assessment of breast density is an important component because the risk does vary by a factor of 3 to 7. And then I think what you can do is you can then decide if a person is low risk, the breasts are not that dense, the screening is negative, then you can probably go to every 2 or 3 year mammography and not do it annually. For those that remain at higher risk, you've got to maintain the pace in order to catch, and presumably down here do a clinical breast exam to catch triple negative but also emergent cancers. For those under 35 or under 40, depending on the family history, then from 20 to 30 is breast self-exam with possibly a couple of clinical breast exams, but then going to annual clinical breast exam, continuing BSE. Do it during that small phase. So that's probably a reasonable thing to do, but it is fairly resource intense. And so one of the reasons to look at this breast fair was that if governments don't step in, a civil society option and partnership may be useful. But on the other hand, if it's not an optimized activity, you could be doing a lot of breast exams, a lot of teaching, and actually find no cancers and not actually reduce the risk of cancer. So, these things need to be studied to optimize them, otherwise they could just be a waste of resources. Yeah, you can use an ultrasound or an MRI. Yeah.
Saw a question from Dr. Bloomfield.
Good morning again, Dr. Jones. Again, great presentation. This is more a comment. I've been working with the Cancer Society of the Bahamas for a couple of years. The one-day operations that we commonly do is probably great for awareness, but the yield of the people who are probably more likely to be at risk has not been achieved. And so we need to find new ways of probably getting to the islands or wherever we go for these programs and spend some more time A typical Cancer Society operation is on a Saturday. And of course, on Saturdays is when people go shopping or they go to funerals and stuff. So the people who probably are at greatest risk probably don't ever get a chance. The other thing that we found over the years is that we see the same people year after year. So there's a lot of people who are completely excluded from the program. So we need to figure out how to certainly get people to self-examine, and also for these people to use the information that is probably gleaned when we have these programs to take themselves maybe into NASA to get their mammograms or ultrasound done. And I think we probably be able to do a better job at what we're doing.
Yeah, I think these things have a role because the community-based approaches also may reach disadvantaged individuals, people who are less likely to go to a hospital, things like that. Obviously, if you're going to do on-site imaging and you're going to do it at the hospital, then that's negating that point. But I do think there's a role to play for this kind of activity. But the key thing in the down in the region is that the patients get access to treatment, not so much for screening the clients, because if you have only 5% of individuals in the 9 OECS countries having access to radiotherapy, which improves survival by 10%, and you want to reach your NCD UN Sustainable Development Goal of a 30% reduction in cancer mortality, then the simple introduction of a high quality radiation service for those 9 islands and guaranteeing that every patient who has a diagnosis of cancer is at least evaluated by that cancer center, you would increase the survival of all these patients. You need to shorten the time to get to treatment. You need all of them to get to multidisciplinary clinics, and you need them to get the treatment effectively. So we could put in several millions in a screening program, or we could put in several millions in the treatment side. And I think right now the priority would be the treatment side and not the screening. So leaving it to community-based services to do this and to physicians to independently send in is probably a better use of Antiguan dollars, including revitalizing Bermuda after the hurricane, rather than creating a systematic screening program in mammography.
Thank you very much,
Yeah,
Dr.
thank you.
Jones.